Doing very well, very well, very well. I There's a lot happening in the world right now. There's a lot of debates happening. A lot of people talking about various political issues that where I think that an elder such as yourself, meaning a person that has some experience politically and otherwise that cares about Black folks, should chime in on. Have you been following what's been going on in the media recently with this whole conversation about illegal immigration and everything else?
Well, yeah, I've seen a little bit of it on TV, and let me be perfectly candid with you, and be perfectly honest with you, I just think it's grossly insulting to me, to be honest with you. Now, we all need to be humanistic in our opinions and our feelings about other people, and trying to help where we can. But I just find it so ironic and so sad that right now, even the Black leadership in this country and invisible Blacks are rushing down to be concerned about children that are being separated from their parents on the borders of this country, that are coming into the country illegally. And about 3 years ago, they had about 115,000, I'm sure, up at the border coming into the country. They're illegals. That's a fact. But what really concerns me, more so than the fact that this country is so obliquely and so totally supportive of immigrants coming to the country and immigrants' children, to make sure they got proper care, food, health, education, and a place to live. But they've never expressed the same concern about Black folk. And I think it's a gross insult. And I look on TV and I see all these Black members of the overclass, the members of civil rights organizations, members of the Black political orbit, rushing down to do something for immigrant kids coming to the country illegally. But they've never expressed the same amount of concern for Black folk in this country, for Black children. Let's go back to slavery for a second and bring up to date. Throughout slavery, Dr. Watkins, it was a common practice to separate Black parents from Black children. And as a matter of fact, they're doing slavery, they would sell them into what they call Deep South. As soon as they got them age, they would sell them or trade them off to another farmer or to another plantation owner. And they set up 3 states like North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland became slave breeding states, where they intentionally impregnated Black women to produce Black kids so they could sell them as soon as they got to be about 5 or 6, 7 years of age to work in the fields. Nobody expressed any concerns about that. They didn't try to, that was a destructive element of the Black family in this country. And nobody expressed any concerns for 360 years about how Black children are being separated from the parents. Then later on, up in recent years, foster care homes, the same thing. They've been pulling Black kids away from home, putting them in foster care. Nobody expressed any concerns. So I am not only insulted, but I'm angry over the fact I got Black leaders and visible Blacks in this country expressing such profound and intense concerns about the humanitarian efforts in this country that should be demonstrating towards immigrant children coming into the country. But at the same time, in this country, 38%, Dr. Watkins, 38% of all the Black children in America that are native Blacks, 38% are beneath the poverty line. Nobody's expressing any concerns about that. And I go to a lot of major cities in the country right now, like Detroit and St. Louis and other cities, that you got 50% of all the Black kids graduate from high school cannot read and write. I don't hear any concerns about that. When I found all these Black kids now in gangs, they're selling drugs, trying to earn enough money to feed themselves. I had kids coming to school with no food in their belly. What they have for breakfast is a darn bag of potato chips and a soda pop, a bottle of pop. I don't see any concerns being expressed about that. When I see all these Black kids now strung out, and either impregnated and by another youngster, and can't find jobs, 51% unemployment rate in the country. Nobody expressing concerns about that. 87% of the Black youth in America right now can't find jobs. Why don't they? I want these Black leaders and these Black civil rights leaders to cut the BS. And I'm gonna ask the question. I'm raising it with you, and I want you to raise it across this country in my name if you want to, and ask your listeners right now, your viewers, what does it take? What does it take? That's the question I'm asking. Those 3 words. What does it take for Black folk to wake up and smell the coffee, start taking care of their own people, expressing that kind of concern for their own? They've never done it, because you see in this country that immigration is synonymous with European immigrants coming to the country, or anybody who can be classified as whites. Immigration is a code word for anything other than Blacks. The immigration policy in this country throughout the nation history since 1790 has been anti-Black. immigration policy anti-black. So why in the world would the only people that's negatively impacted by immigration is black folk? So why are black folk rushing down to try to rescue white kids or non-black kids and pretend that somehow they're obliged to be the carrot and burden for morality around the world, to be the great humanistic people to take care of everybody but their own? Please tell me that, and tell me what does it take, and have your listeners call and tell me today, what does it take for black folk to wake up and smell the coffee and have some self-concern about their own people, Dr. Watkins?
Well, I tell you what, the coffee's been brewing for a long time, but I think our nostrils are broke. I think we got our nostrils covered up because we can't smell the coffee, and we still sleep for, most of us have been asleep. And everybody, by the way, I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson. We're talking about this whole conversation on illegal immigration. This whole thing where our heartstrings are being pulled by this separation of families and the trauma on the kids and stuff like that. And what we're basically saying, we're not saying that the kids deserve any of this. What we're saying is that what black people have gone through and continue to go through is 100 times worse. And you ain't never seen all these white folks, all these Democrats and everybody else is trying to get you to feel sorry for somebody else's kids. These very same people have never felt sorry for your kids. These same people have never felt bad for you. But I want everybody to know the Harvest Institute is where Dr. Anderson does his work. He's one of our leading scholars. He's fighting for black people. He's doing very important work, including a lawsuit on reparations. Please, please, please go there and make a donation at some point. It's harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. That's where you can go support his think tank. We need to support black think tanks just like white folks support white think tanks. We need black think tanks. So that way we can have people out here that are on our side, that are supported and taken care of, because part of the reason they sell you out is because somebody else is paying their bills. So we have to support our own. That's very important. Now, Dr. Anderson, let me ask you about this. Then, in your book, Black Labor, White Wealth, I was looking up, you have a section on ethnic immigrants in your book. And you said something that was interesting about, kind of how black people are sort of expected just to sort of be lumped into, to accept the idea that we should be lumped with any immigrant that comes from another country. That we, that they're struggling because they're from, wherever it is, Scotland or somewhere, and we're struggling because we're black. So we're supposed to be the same and we get the same programs and everything else. And you've always said that that's not really going to work, or it's not fair to us. And so what I'm going to read what you wrote here, and then I'd like to get your thoughts on that. You said that grouping blacks with lesser aggrieved groups, in effect, mutes and obscures the legitimate grievances of blacks while veiling the moral, legal, and financial responsibility the dominant society has to correct the suffering of 36 million black Americans. So it sounds like you were saying here that when we get lumped together, it kind of waters down our pain, waters down our experience, and allows people to kind of get away with ignoring that. Like they can say, well, look, let's all go take care of these, 2,000 immigrant kids, but we're going to forget about the 2 million black kids who went through something 10 times worse. Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, well, I'll be glad to. The whole immigration process, as I've said before, started in 1790, and it was designed specifically and solely to reward and compensate and provide unearned benefits to people coming in here who will be classified as immigrants. Blacks are the only non-immigrants in the country. That's why your first immigration law set up in 1790 was strictly for those other than black folk coming into the country. That was modified again later on after the Civil War, again, where it was broadened so that anybody coming into the country at that time, Southern Europeans and Jews all were coming into the country, that they could come in as immigrants. But black folk have never been treated like immigrants. And immigrants have a negative impact on black folk. It always have. And up until about the turn of this century, every so-called black leader in the history of this nation, whether you talk about Booker T. Washington or Frederick Douglass, they were always opposed to immigration. They're saying it's not right, it's not fair, it's immoral for you to keep bringing in people into this country and giving them land, resources, access to things and rights and privileges that you're denying to black folk. This was up until about 1900, early 1900s. Black folk were screaming. W.B. Du Bois saying the same thing, that black folk do not get any benefits. Other people get the entitlements that black folk should have. And more importantly, those immigrants come in here, they begin to injure black folk. Black folk are a permanent minority in a society where the majority will win and rule, Dr. Watkins. That's why in the year 2000, we had enough Hispanics coming in alone, because their population in 100 years went up over 5,000% to be able to pass black folk and surpass black folk, where black folk had been second-class citizens in this country, have been second-class citizens in this country for 360 years. All of a sudden, Hispanics started pouring into the country based on a policy they set up in 1975 out in Kansas City, that they were going to displace black folk by the year 2000 by classifying anybody who speaks Spanish around the country, around the world, and suggest and drive them into the United States to displace, remove, and subordinate black folk. They hit it dead on the head. So black folk became third-class citizens in the year 2000. And in a society where the majority will win and rule, black folk also became third-class citizens. That also wiped out the black vote. You hear all these Democrats talking about their rights to vote. Black folk cannot win by voting. You're 13% of the population, and you were always outnumbered, almost again, about 9-1 by whites and other groups. Now when the Hispanics took over in the 2000, you're now outnumbered 10-1. That means that your vote is now null and void by the Hispanic vote. Where Hispanics now, where you wake up 44% of the population, these immigrants now, Hispanics alone, they now make up 57 million. They've outnumbered your vote. Your vote is null and void just by Hispanics alone. In a society our vote count. Your vote does not count. Nobody needs your vote, because they now replaced you. And all these other groups coming in the country, they're coming in the country to take up what you should have. Secondly, black folk don't understand that because too many of our people are intellectually lazy, and those in political positions in public office, either through appointments or election, they are criminally incompetent. They don't understand the negative impact that immigration has on black folk. They won't go out and fight to try to say black folk must be protected, just as the second Constitution specified in the civil rights laws, the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, that black folk must be treated in all manners similar to whites. And if white folk are not being negatively impacted, Dr. Watkins, by immigration, then you're violating the Constitution by bringing in people over them that's negatively impacting black folk and only black folk alone. That's why in Obama's administration, let's take employment. You got an over 51% national employment rate in this country. And while from 2006 up to Obama left office, almost 47 to 51% of all the jobs, new job hires, went to Hispanics, even though black folk have a 51% unemployment rate. Hispanic unemployment rate now somewhere like about 4.6. And white unemployment was 4.3. Asian and Arab unemployment rate is almost zero. The only people that got a massive unemployment rate that is structural. They keep telling me black folk unemployment rate is only double white. That's a lie. You got a structural unemployment rate that immigrants is feeling. They come into the country. They're shutting black folk down because we have black folk that've given up and never have a job again. The job roles and reports are based on two things: people are searching for jobs and those who are collecting unemployment compensation. And immigrants are displacing blacks in jobs, displacing blacks in education, displacing black folk in employment opportunities, displacing blacks in educational programs. You go to Florida and California, most of the administrators in those communities now, they're displacing black teachers and black administrators with Hispanics. It's the negative. And in conclusion, my remarks is that what our political leaders that want to be the great humanitarians and save everybody their own people, what fail to understand is that there is, as Newton's third law, which says for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You can't bring in all these immigrants and provide all these benefits and services and goods and jobs and employments and schooling and not impact something negatively. It's black folks being negatively impacted. And I'm sick and tired of black leaders betraying their own race to try to go out and try to save the world while their own people suffer and perish.
All right, everybody. I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson, author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Black History Reader, and Dirty Little Secrets. If you want to find his books or make a donation to his institute, you can go to harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. We also have copies of his books available at blacklaborwhitewealth.com. That's blacklaborwhitewealth.com. Make sure you hit the like button, share button, subscribe button so that everybody can hear this conversation. We're competing with big media, so we really need your help in terms of spreading the message of ideas in the Black community that are not consistent with what people are telling us to think, but independent ideas from people who care about you. Dr. Anderson, let me ask you about this. I couldn't quite find it in your book. Just so everybody knows, when I'm looking down, I'm looking at his book. Right? This book, Black Labor, White Wealth, is literally ripped up and written all in and everything else because I go through it repeatedly. This is one of my Bibles in terms of books that I really go through all the time. You talk in the book about how immigration laws have been used. I thought it was interesting how you mentioned that Black leaders, before we got into this case of the Black overclass being controlled by the Democratic Party, that you said back, in the past, Black leaders were not in support of open borders and extreme, immigration and all this other stuff. And also what was interesting is that I remember reading in either this book or Powernomics where you talked about how the percentage of Black people in this country, the percentage of Americans that were Black, like meaning the size of our collective, has shrank as a result of deliberate immigration policies designed to dilute the power of the Black vote. Can you kind of speak to that? Just how much has that changed? Like, for example, if I go back 100 years or 150 years, what percentage of the American population was Black back then versus the percentage of the population that's Black right now?
Okay, good. That's a good question, Dr. Watkins. Up to before the end of slavery, in the South, Black were the majority population in about 6 or 7 southern states. They were the majority population. You start talking about Georgia, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana. Blacks were the majority population in those states. In some cases, Black folk were over 50% of the population. That was a big threat. That became the big threat that really triggered the Revolutionary War. Was that the colonists, the white colonists, got concerned that they had such a large, significant Black population, and they bring in more, and they didn't want any more shipped in here because they got fearful that the Blacks would hook up with the Indians and they could drive whites out of the United States back to Europe. And they tried to stop the European royal companies, the royal slave companies, which again we talked about the prince and this marriage recently and the royalty getting married. They had the royal slave company. That's what shipped all these Blacks into here. And they wanted to stop them from shipping in anymore in here. And but Blacks were the dominant population. So what they set up 2 policies that these are very important policies for your people, for our people to remember this, is that in the South, because Black folk were the dominant population, what they're saying is that if you send any more Blacks into the South, when those plantations, the rule and the Carter principle came out in the slave law of 1705, and also which says that that here's the restrictions again would apply starting in 1712. And here's what it says basically, 1710 rather, is that for every black person in the South, if you must, every 4 or 5, you got to have at least one white person there to monitor and patrol and monitor them. That was called the Diversity Act, Dr. Watkins. You keep hearing about diversity. The Diversity Act came out of 1705 slave code, which says we got to have somebody to monitor and watch these people to make sure they don't create any disturbance, don't have any riots or slave revolts. And the first in South Carolina, that's what started. The first police force, Dr. Watkins, came out of South Carolina based on the Diversity Act. And that's why they had badges. They called them paddy rollers, where they had to monitor Blacks on the roads to make sure that they were not plotting or scheming to escape. But they say so for every 4 to 5 Blacks in the South, you must have at least one white. And so the whites charged every European nation to clean out their prisons, their mental institutions, and their jails, and the insane asylum, to ship whites over here to help monitor these Blacks. That's why Georgia came into existence, to be a filtering state element for Blacks trying to escape to get out of slavery. They ship whites in here, even out of milk prisoners and everything else, to make sure they monitor and control Black folk. That's where your paddy rollers, that's where your police forces came from. They had badges to make sure that they could check Blacks, make sure that they were not causing any problems. They had to protect white lives, white property, and everything else. That was called the Diversity Act of 1705. Nowadays, they got blacks going around championing diversity by bringing in more immigrants into the country and trying to make sure they got women, gays, everybody in the Diversity Act, not knowing that went into effect against black folk. And again, this was again spoken and related to by in the Davis case in 1978, the Davis case, when the Supreme Court says that the only people who can legitimately be entitled to affirmative action and reparation should be black folk, not minorities, not poor folk, anybody else. And guess what? All the Hispanics, Asians, and Arabs, everybody says, we know that we've not been treated like blacks, but it would just appear better if we and be more acceptable if we have them included with blacks, and we had diversity. So that's when the diversity thing popped up again. And yet you got blacks screaming about diversity in history, and then in the recent years, 1970s, they're loving diversity, and diversity is anti-black based on immigration.
Wow. Well, Dr. Anderson, what's interesting to me, and I assume it's still true. I know you mentioned it in your book, Black Labor, White Wealth. You mentioned this 25 years ago. I think it's still true to this day. A lot of people talk about this black-brown coalition, that being black means you're automatically aligned with the whole Hispanic community politically. I don't see that. I see it being a one-way street. I see us supporting them and them not really supporting us like that. And what you mentioned, which I think is still true, is that the vast majority of Hispanic people that come from south of the border to the U.S. classify themselves as white. Is that still the case, or has that changed?
Yes. No, they hadn't changed one iota. That's exactly right. What people don't understand is that what they've done, they've corrupted the whole concept of civil rights and stuff to dilute black folk down, to make sure there's no threat to the society, just as they did back in, as I said, centuries ago. Because immigrants come to this country are reclassified, and to prepare to make it be race-based. Hispanics are nothing but white folks speaking Spanish. They're a culture group. They're not a race, and they're not a race group. They throw them in the category of a minority to dilute and water down and keep the black man tamed and restrained by throwing him into the pot against him. So Hispanics are nothing but white folks speaking Spanish. And again, they come in with an incentive over black folk, their culture, their language, and being white, they get 3 or 4 advantages over blacks. Arabs come in this country, they are classified as whites. They're just practicing Islam, but they're classified as whites and have their own culture and their own language. So they get advantages over black folk. The same thing with the Asians. The Asians were on probation to be white now, but the Yick and Woke decision back in the 1880s and also in the 1920s said that under no circumstances would the Asians said that they want to be associated, identified with black folk. Now, why this is important to answer your question is that during slavery, 98% of all the white people in the country who opposed to black folk did not want them freed from slavery. Now here we are, 150 years later, and still, according to research, 88 to 90% of whites still don't care about black folk. There's still massive hate for black folk in this country, even 150 years after slavery. But in terms of immigrants, there's 63 to 64% of all the immigrants come to this country. Asians, Arabs, and Hispanics, they are opposed to black folk, do not want to be associated with, identified with black folk under any circumstance. They don't want to be they're not your friends, they're not your allies. Black people, native blacks have no friends and allies. and that's why the Asians tell you up front that they're not going to do business with black folk. They're not going to hire black folk. They're not going to buy from black folk. And yet I can find something like about 137,000 Asians who become multimillionaires off of selling products to black folk. I can't find one black person who become a multimillionaire off of selling something to Asians. The Asians said, we don't play that. It's against our culture to buy from black folk, to be identified with black folk. You got 2 Supreme Court decisions that was rendered that says that Asians will not be put into schools or associated in black communities with black folk.
Really?
And black folk are talking about people of color. What people of color are you talking about? You should be talking about black folk. You're going to integrate with your own damn people first. Quit trying to integrate with people based on culture, on gender, on handicaps, on poverty. That's what your civil rights leaders want to do. In 1970s, they got co-opted by non-economic liberalism in the country and decided to give up and surrender and start accepting everybody as being equal to black folk, which handicaps black folk.
Wow. Everybody, this is Dr. Claud Anderson, author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Black History Reader, and Dirty Little Secrets. Go find out about his books, find out about his work. And also, please, I hope you'll consider making a donation at harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. Also, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, subscribe button, follow, share, like, all these things. Pass the conversation on, join the conversation. This is what we do on Intellectual Chocolate. We give you things that you're not going to get anywhere else. Also, if you really want to get it in up close in person and to meet all the other people that follow what we're doing, come to the All Black National Convention. Dr. Anderson will be there. Kenny Gamble will be there. A lot of people will be there. I'm going to reach out to see if Jay Morrison can make it. I think he can. And a lot of other great Black people who are doing amazing things. So if you really want a fellowship with Black people and be in a space where Black strength is there, come to the All Black National Convention, September 27th through the 30th in Philadelphia. You can learn more at allblacknationalconvention.com. That's allblacknationalconvention.com. Now, Dr. Anderson, let me ask you this.
Doctor, can I make one point that can answer your earlier question? I wasn't specific enough for you. You asked me what has changed in terms of Black status in population throughout history. Very quickly, that on the eve of the Civil War, you only had you had less than about 4,000 to 5,000 Hispanics in the entire United States. Did you hear what I said? You only had about 4,000 to 6,000 Hispanics in the entire United States. At the same time, you had 4.5, almost 5 million Black folk in America. Now compare that quantitatively. You got somewhere between 4 and 6 million. 4 to 6,000 Hispanics in the entire United States. You got 4.5, almost 5 million Blacks in the United States. That was at that time. Now move that up to 1900. Let's move up 40 years now. At that point in time, when slavery ended, Hispanics started coming in. Hispanics went up by 1900 to approximately 100,000. You had 100,000 Hispanics in 1900 that were living in the United States. Now, but at the same time, the Black population had moved from 4.5 to 5 million up to 11, almost 12 million Blacks living in the United States. Now you're a mathematician. Watch that. Now watch these numbers. Now you got 100,000 in 1900. You got 100,000 Hispanics, and you got almost 12 million Black folk. Now for the next 100 years, from 1900 to 2000. They got the same identical birth rate. And watch this, they got the same identical birth rate for 100 years with 100,000 Hispanics and almost 12 million Blacks. Now, down by 2000, guess what? Hispanics then had increased and caught Blacks. That 100,000 caught up with Black folk and surpassed them. So where now they are 57 million and Black folk are 44 million. That signifies almost a 5,500% increase in population. Multiply that and see what your percentage of population in the same identical birth rate, because they came in from immigration between 1970 and 1990. The population numbers of Hispanics coming to this country went up over 300% in that 20-year period. That's why right now that about 92% of all the Hispanics in the United States have been here less than 40 years. And yet they own and control more businesses, got more income, wealth, and power and resources than Black folk. And then when 92% haven't even been in the country for less than 40 years. And now you're down on the border bringing in more while your own people are being stagnated and buried. Now you say, well, we got the right to vote. Now let's go to your vote. If you're voting in a number, but when you're outnumbered 10 to 1, Dr. Watkins, who needs your vote? If I were to throw you the example I like to use, if you put 10 people in a room, 9 of them are Ku Klux Klan members, and 1 is a Black person. They're going to vote on what they're going to have, who's going to be lynched. Who cares what the Black man vote means? It's irrelevant, not necessary. It's overshadowed by the opposition. In this country right now, if Blacks are numbered 9 to 1 to 10 to 1 against whites, and all these Asians, Arabs, and Hispanics also classified as whites, they are conservative. They're going to go with the conservative party. Democrats keep opening the door, pushing to bring in more immigrants, and but half those immigrants are not going to go with the Democratic Party. They're going to go with the Republican Party. They are conservatives. They came in from conservatives, whether they're Arabs, Asian, Hispanics. They are conservatives. They got a very black folk.
Well, as you mentioned in your book, it's a good point that many of the people that come from Latin America are descendants of people who benefited from slavery. Like they have, great great grandparents who benefited from bringing black slaves to Latin America. And also, that what you just said, that number, I mean, I want to repeat that, what you just said about the numbers, because I think black folks have to pay attention to this. You said this, this was really your concept more so than mine, but, it looks like immigration policy, just sort of allowing people to just come across the border like it ain't no thing and making us believe that should be okay, that's been designed to deliberately dilute the influence of black voters. Because if it wasn't for all the illegal immigration and the legal immigration that's allowed, we would actually have a vote that really counted. Like you said, in 1840, approximately, there was 4,000 Hispanics and 4 million black people. So we outnumbered the Hispanic population 1,000 to 1. In 1900, there was 100,000 to 12 million. And you could have still continued with immigration in a fair way and allow black people to still not be diluted. But you knew of now where, you got over 50, 60 million Hispanic people, 11 million people here illegally. And black folks, we're 40 million people. So we can't, the illegal population is 1/4 of our total population. And the legal immigrant population far exceeds our population. So it's almost like we've got to the point where we just literally shot our own selves in the foot. We gave all of our political power away because we got people that are telling us things that just are not true.
That's right. You are a black folk in America. Black native blacks are a planned minority. It's like going all the way back to slavery. You are a systematically planned minority. The immigration laws kept you as a minority. That's why up until about 1924, you had a zero quota on black folk coming into the country as immigrants. Didn't you know that? They got a zero quota on you. And they modified it. They modified in 1965 in the Civil Rights Law. When they modified the immigration laws, what they said is that let's modify, we can bring in more people. But they said, let's base it on family, reuniting the family. The same thing, the trick they're using now. Let's use it to reunite the family. They knew that if you had a zero quota, Dr. Watkins, please help me through this thinking. If they had a zero quota on you coming here and for centuries, and it was open for everybody else, as many whites, doors wide open for immigrants. They had a limited for amount number for Hispanics and Arabs and Asians, but they had a zero quota on blacks. Then in 1965, they come up with a new immigration law. So here's what we do. For family reunification, we're going to now put in an immigration policy based on reuniting with your ancestors or your relatives that are here. If you haven't had any, Dr. Watkins, and you help me with this now, because I know you understand this. Help me with this. How do you fathom that? I mean, what kind of intelligence does that signify?
It's mathematics. 0 times 100 is 0. 0 times 1,000 is 0. So if you have not let black people come into the country anyway, then there is no reuniting the families because there was nobody even allowed in to open the door. And you're right. You have and I want everybody who has black labor, white wealth. If you don't have it, get it for your children. This is a book your kids need to read before they read any book written by any European, Asian author or anybody else. Have them read Black Labor, White Wealth. This book changed my life. That's why it's ripped up and everything else. Because I think history is important. Black folks don't know history. That's why we fall for these things. But on table 7 and page 105, you show from 1967 and versus 1991. You have the median income levels of the different groups, but then you also have in another table, table 6 on page 101, you show the U.S. government's preferential ordering of immigrants according to official quotas in 1924. And basically, I'm going to summarize this for everybody. Basically, on this chart on page 101 in Black Labor, White Wealth, if you were white, if you were English, anybody could come. As many people as possible could come if they were from England. If you were Irish, from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, then they have various numbers: 34,000, 28,000, 51,000 per year. Southern Europe, 3,800. Then it starts to dip off. It starts to reduce when you get to Middle East, Far East, and Hispanic. Those numbers drop. But here's the kicker, everybody. Pay attention now. When they get to the part of African nationality, black people, the number is 0. It says closed. That means it ain't a low quota, high quota, no quota. There's no number. The number is 0. They said we do not want any black people from other countries coming into the United States. That's what immigration policy has been for us for a very, very long time. Dr. Anderson,
how does that make any sense then if we wait to 1965 and say we'll now let you come in based on your previous pattern and your previous family relationships and ties in this country? In other words, we'll let you have shoes if you can show us you have some shoes. If you say I've never had any shoes, then they say, well, you can't get any shoes. I find it just grossly offensive. Maybe I'm the only one in my history. As a forensic historian, that just always bothered me. I said, my people can't be that intellectually lazy, or why would they fall for bamboozlement every time?
Well, you know what it reminds me of is like how they have these little deals in inner cities where they'll say you can buy the building for $1, but you have to already own property in the neighborhood. And they know that the black folks, most of them don't own any property, but they'll sell it to white folks and Asian folks and Arabs and whoever is in the neighborhood for $1 because they already own a building in the neighborhood. Or when you were talking about the 1866 Indian Treaty, and you were talking about how black folks got written out of all the money that was supposed to go to Native American tribes because they basically said, what was it, that your grandfather had to be full blood Indian or something like that? Is that what it was?
It's called the blood quantum law.
Yeah, right. The blood quantum law, right? And what's interesting to me, Dr. Anderson, is that every time they can use lineage to exclude black folks, they love doing that. They love saying, well, if your grandfather didn't do XYZ, then you can't do XYZ. But they never let lineage is rarely allowed to benefit black folks. Because if they made another law that said, look, if your great-great-great-grandparent was a slave, then you get a certain amount of money. If you can prove that your triple great or quadruple great grandmother or grandfather was a slave, then we'd have an influx of money coming into the black community. But that's one area they won't talk about. So all these people that want us to get all sensitive and touchy-feely about what they're doing to illegal immigrants who chose to violate the law and break into another country, they've never shown that same level of sympathy for black people who are in even worse conditions where their parents didn't choose to do anything. Their parents didn't choose to break any laws, didn't hurt anybody, but yet their families were broken up. They went through trauma, but none of these same people had any sympathy for that.
Right, and if you look at the Black History Reader, and in the section, I think maybe look at page I think it's where I put in the income levels in the country. Did you see that in your book there?
I have my copy downstairs. I got my other one in Powernomics right here, but I got my Black History Reader in my other office downstairs. Well, please go ahead.
It says that the real median household income by race and Hispanic origin of households from 1967 to 2014. From 1967, Dr. Watkins, to 2014. And you have it now in front of you?
I'm looking in Black Labor, White Wealth. You have another chart, but it's
the Black History Reader now. And it says on there, look at this, it says the median family income. And guess who's on the bottom? The top income brackets now are filled by Asians. Asians coming to the country. They get where their income is double black folk. They didn't even start coming into the country in big magnitudes until about 1985, as I said, before 1990. Hispanics, they're over black folk. Everybody's got black folk on the bottom, and all these immigrants. This is put out by the United States Department of Commerce and the Census Research, right there. Go to page 4 in the Black History Reader. It shows you that black folks still own and control not more than 1/2 or 1% of anything in the country. They got an unemployment rate. Their median income is below everybody's. They own and control practically nothing, from New York to San Diego. They don't own any of these big buildings. Look at the big buildings, the trucking company, the airlines, the ships, the boats, the restaurants, the hotels. They own nothing. And yet these immigrants have come into the country since that is as indicated by the federal government since 1967. And now they've surpassed black folk and have doubled everything over black folk in between 1967 and 2014. Just using it as an example. Now you got black civil rights leaders. They don't know this. You got black elected officials and appointed. They don't know this. They don't know that there are people being buried alive. What are they smoking? Whatever they're smoking is illegal then. And so what they should be fighting for down on the border right now is saying, yes, we're concerned about these young kids being separated. But what we're also even more concerned about is our own self-interest. Why don't you put black folk in a protected class the way they're supposed to be? Why aren't blacks in a protected class just like white women are in a protected class? And American Indians are in a protected class. Blacks were at one time in history, they were in a protected class called the Freedmen Bureau. They were in a protected class for about 2 years, from about 1865 to 1867, when Andrew Johnson said, no, we ain't gonna protect these blacks. We're gonna turn them loose as ex-slaves, turn them loose with no land, no privileges, no rights, no tools, no animals, no weapons, no clothes, no jobs, no businesses, no education, and no organizations. And that way tell them to compete with nothing. That was put into the literature, that you would leave slavery with nothing. But by the same token, whites who have been in here as indentured servants, they were in there for a 5 to 7 year contract. They got free land, they got free labor, they got pays, they got wages. They were given an animal, a horse, and some tools to be able to survive, and weapons. These are the poor whites that came to the country. But and Hispanics, they weren't even in the country. But nobody's ever done anything for black folk, because black folk are the third rail in our society. They'll do anything for anybody before they do it for black folk. And I'm just totally adamantly disappointed in our so-called visible blacks. Tell your listeners, go watch every day on TV. Watch TV. In the news, they're going to have some black there who's probably an immigrant from another country, from the Caribbean or Africa, talking about, well, we need to bring in more immigration. They're not native blacks. No native blacks got any sense going to be saying that. They didn't up until the 1900s. And now the other thing you see, that blacks should be put into protected class. But black folks should also be entitled to all those benefits they're giving all those immigrants. Give it to these native blacks. Go into Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then St. Louis, Detroit, Michigan, and give them those same rights and privileges. Help those black folks start businesses. And next week when I come on your program, I'm gonna give you a list of all the money that's been given out to all these different Asians, Arabs, and Hispanic groups that never gave black folk. This country never gave black folk a penny. They gave it to the immigrants. I'm gonna show you exactly what immigrants have been getting in very quantifiable terms as money and incentives and opportunities for business development and for building communities and getting the best education. That's like right now up in Harvard University today. They're concerned about the Asians not being able to, being controlled or limited, and how many of them can penetrate the college enrollment system. And yet, by the same token, they did the same thing back in the early 1920s. They went to Jews, and everybody came in and dominated black folk. But they never say, what are we going to do specifically to change the imposed ignorance that we imposed on black folk, and we said it was against the law to teach a black person to read and write? What are they going to do to try to balance out the scale on black folk? Nobody wants to do it. It's a third rail. And right now, black folk got to wake up and smell the coffee. And what I said to you when I started your program is, what does it take? What does it take for black folk to wake up, Dr. Watkins?
Well, I'll tell you what, there are black people that are awake. There are things that I have said about this issue publicly recently that received a reaction from black folks that probably I wouldn't have got a decade ago. I think there's a lot of black people that have really been educated, and I think they're being educated by people like yourself who are giving them history. I think that what you teach is so important because you're giving the historical context to let people understand how the game's being played. So black people might be behind, but we don't stay behind. Some of us won't stay behind. There's I believe a class of black folks that I think this is the accelerated class, if you want to call it. I'm talking about a class of black folks who ain't stupid. They might have started at the bottom, but they're going to get to the top, and they know how to break out of these systems. They know how to think for themselves, and it's going to be a revolution. It's going to require a revolution of us breaking away from all of those chains so we can just decide for ourselves what the truth should be and what our opinion should be. And so I think that these conversations are real important. And what I love about it is that, I wanted to talk to you every week, and I'm glad you agreed to do this because, when you don't know their history, they can play the same trick on you over and over and over again. Just for example, there's about 4 or 5 things you pointed out from 100 years ago that we never learned in school that I think probably blew people's minds. I mean, if that happened to you, if y'all watching and that's how you feel, say something, say thank you, or let them know you appreciate them, because we don't show appreciation to the people in our community that are really fighting for us. We'll show more appreciation to a rapper than we show to a scholar that cares about the community. Now, rappers are cool, but scholars are better in terms of being able to make you smart. A rapper can entertain you like he entertains white folks. A scholar will elevate you and make your life better if he's the right kind of scholar. So, Dr. Anderson, let me give you the last word before I let you get back to your busy day. What do you think is kind of like a closing thought that people could walk away with to really understand how to process legal and illegal immigration, where you can still be sympathetic, but at the same time be more sympathetic to your own people and your own cause at the same time?
I think the black folk need to somehow have a major convention, a major situation where black folk will wake up and smell the coffee to these situations and be introduced to the facts and of life. And because right now in America, black interest, black needs, and black dilemma is a lost priority in our society. And while it's being a lost priority in our society, because we have a ranking order of privileges and rights and power in our society, blacks will wind up at the bottom as the official permanent scapegoats. Every time something negative happens, they're going to go after black folk. They're not going after the immigrants. You're not going to hear about anybody lynching and castrating Asians, Arabs in this country. They're going after black folk. We have a pecking order, a feeding chain going from the highest to the lowest. Sometimes whites call it a trickle-down practice, trickle-down theories of economics and everything else. Black folk are on the bottom in everything you can think of. They're carrying 6 to 8 times their fair share of everything that's bad, but they can't get more than 1/2 or 1% of anything that's good and valued and that they can compete with and use to elevate the quality of their lives. They're not capable of competing. They don't have the resources and the tools. And so consequently, as our society begins to implode and go down under Trump and the rest of these people, that these people are going to come after black folk. At first, you might hear the KKK starting up or the conservatives going after the primary target they're going to be black folk. They might badmouth Jews. They might badmouth the women. They might badmouth Arabs and Asians and Hispanics, but they're going to go after black folk. Black folk are going to be the scapegoat. And when terrorism comes back to this country again, the most vulnerable people are going to be black neighborhoods. The black neighborhoods are not organized. They have no basic institutions. They have no leadership. They've been abandoned. They're obsolete. They've been set up to get wiped off the face of the earth. They don't come together very quickly and start to understand these things I'm telling you about black history. I wrote all 5 of my books when I left government, and I've been blessed by being with the highest levels of government for every level, from the local to state to governors, with presidents, head of trade missions around the world. And I learned from all those experiences that black folk are the scapegoats. They're going to be on the bottom. They are totally ill prepared to compete. But they've been bought into this social mythology, the social illusions that somehow black folk are in a category called minorities. And therefore, they're going to get equal treatment. Black folk, even in the category of minority, black folk on the bottom. White women dominate the minority category. Now Asians are going to dominate. Now Hispanics are going to dominate it. Blacks get nothing out of minority. They got to start going for reparations. They got to sort of organize themselves. They got to rebuild their communities. They got to start being producers rather than consumers. They got to get some new kind of leadership in this country real fast. Do not depend on these civil rights leaders, these black elected officials, to do anything for them. Do not depend on the black overclass. The black overclass and the black elected officials and the black civil rights leaders have already gotten their meritorious manumission. They've been declared as bona fidely safe. They're safe. They're not going to leave their safe position to do anything for black folk. So that's what I would say to you in conclusion. They better wake up and smell the coffee. And as I said to you initially, what does it take to wake them up?
Well, I tell you what, I always tell my students, I've been telling them for a long time, that you was the first person I ever met in 2006. You were the first person I ever met who told me that it was a good thing to be radical. I remember that, and I laugh about that to this day, because you talk about the safe Negroes versus unsafe. I used to go on CNN a lot back in the day, and they still call me, to do an interview, because one of their black producers will see me and say, "Oh, he'd be great for this segment." And then I always tell them, I say, well, make sure you go do your research. Make sure you know what you're signing up for, because I'm not a typical Negro. And they inevitably, every time, they come back and they cancel. They say, oh, we decided to go in a different direction, or we something came up, and I say, good. That's what I thought. That's what I thought. Because, I think that we need everybody watching. I need y'all to stop being the safe Negroes and start being the unsafe Negroes. Be the unsafe Negroes, because if there's enough unsafe Negroes, you can be safe with us. All we need is to keep working together, building our own institutions, being strong together, and we keep each other safe. Don't be safe. Stop being safe in the face of irresponsible tyranny. That's it. Just stop being safe. Be who you're supposed to be. Follow your heart, follow your passion, follow your soul, follow who you believe that you are, and don't let these people take you away from that with that foolishness and that nonsense and those lies and that craziness. That my grandmother used to call it foolishness. That's why I got that word from grandma. But she call it foolishness. Like she said, boys, why are you getting caught up in that foolishness? Because you're better than that. So that's what I say to the Negroes who are running around on TV and everything, getting all irate over illegal immigration, but ain't really done hardly nothing in terms of fighting for real issues in the Black community. That should be a top priority, in my opinion. So I want to say thank you, Dr. Anderson, for your time. I appreciate it. And everybody,
thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And everybody, go ahead.
Next week when we come in, I want your listeners to call and tell me what they found out, what they think it takes for Black folk to wake up, and for a Black man to be a man, and for Black folk to be Black to their heart, and to be native Blacks in America.
All right, there you go. So y'all got the homework assignment. The doctor has spoken. If you want to find out more about Dr. Anderson's work, your children should know about him. He's our version of the Albert Einsteins, in terms of the people that you study in school that you're supposed to look up to, the Booker T's and Malcolm and all that. Dr. Claud Anderson is our generation's version of those people, except greater, in my opinion. And I think that your children should know about him. So go to harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. Please stop through also and consider making a donation. We must support our Black think tanks. I'm really pushing to persuade you to support, because if we don't support our own, then why would we be surprised when our own sells out? So let's make sure we support. Also, if you want to come out to a place where we are making plans, we are engaged in action, we are getting things done, Dr. Anderson will be there along with a lot of other very intelligent Black people. Go to the All Black National Convention. That's going to be in Philadelphia, September 27th through the 30th. You can find out more, buy your tickets early, so the price is lower, at allblacknationalconvention.com. That's allblacknationalconvention.com. And make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and all that stuff before you head out of here. So thanks again, Dr. Anderson. It was great. And I'll see you guys soon. So take care. Have a good day. And we love all of you.
Okay, thank you, bud. I look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, sir. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Everybody, I want to give you guys time to kind of come into this conversation. My name is Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World and the Black Business School. And as you know, each week we get to talk about Powernomics. And the guy to bring in is the expert among experts, the person who has written many, many books for Black people on Black people's issues, ways to put Black people first, is the one and only Dr. Claud Anderson. How you doing today, Dr. Anderson?
Oh, I'm hanging in there, hanging as tough as I can get.
Yeah, well, check this out. You may not know this, but last night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got an urge to cover Powernomics. I was digging into the immigration issue, and I keep all your books. I got all 4 of your books, like literally right here next to my desk, and I figure it's gonna take me the rest of my life to really fully understand everything. So I just read the same stuff over and over and over again. And so last night at 4 o'clock in the morning, I kid you not, I had almost 1,000 people watching. I think it was several hundred people watching, and we were talking about Powernomics and Black labor, white wealth, particularly the section on immigration. Immigration laws and And then what I did was I took a bunch of notes on it and kind of broke it all down. And we literally walked through chapter 5, why blacks cannot emulate ethnic immigrants. And the goal was to try to get a perspective on immigration that is uniquely black, try to get something that's not tainted, by what the media is saying, but really something that's impacted by the truth. And I actually wanted to actually ask you about this. I know we're going to talk about the 14th Amendment. We can get to that. But, right now there's a lot of controversy about immigration, illegal immigration. There's a big caravan that's coming, up north from Mexico. And there's going to be a confrontation between them and Donald Trump. And black folks are being asked to sort of take a side on this whole debate. And I was curious if you followed any of this that's been happening in the media.
Okay, so what is the question you're raising then?
Well, have you followed any of it in the media in terms of the whole situation with the immigrant caravan and all this other stuff, like the group of people?
Well, I listened to it. I looked to it, Dr. Watkins. I don't pay that much attention to it because I don't have a dog in that fight. See, the only ism I'm into is blackism and nowism. And see, this whole immigration question is an insult to black people. The immigration laws in this country has never been addressed to from the original intent that went into effect in 1790. Immigration policies were set up to bury black folk in America, to make them an underclass, to make them the foundation of what we call the American dream. So any immigrant can come here and get all the rights, resources, and unearned benefits that blacks are going to be denied. Blacks were denied the right to enjoy any of the fruits of white society based on the 1638 immigration laws out in the state of Maryland. So immigration has always been negative blacks. And the real thing about it is that nobody's ever addressed that issue. Right now, the black folks should say, hey, I'm not in that fight. But if you're going to keep bringing in an unending influx of immigrants into the country, that's going to reduce us down and make us a permanent minority in a society in which the majority will win and rule and the minorities and lose and suffer. So throughout history, up until the civil rights movement, until the Civil War, blacks made up sometimes 50 to 55% of the population.
Wow. Did you say 50 to 55%?
It varied in the southern states from 50 to 55% of the population. But they started bringing in more immigrants after the Civil War. They brought them in here to bring in whites to make them a management class over black folk. Black folk can be the subservient class. And after the Civil War, the white says, hey, we got all of our land back, Dr. Watkins. You gave us back all the land, even though we were the first terrorists in America, the southern states, which you all now call the red states. That's the same Confederate states that was in existence that started to see the Civil War, that attacked the United States and tried to destroy the country. And so the red states say, hey, now that we fought the Civil War, we lost it, but you all didn't try us and hold us as terrorists and charge us with tyranny. You gave us, you forgave us, gave back all the land in the South. Now we need these black folk again as a labor class. And so let's hold them in abeyance, bring in about 20 to 30 million immigrants into this country to be the management class, and therefore reduce black folks' population down from 50%, started pushing them down so they'd be a permanent minority. So any whites coming to this country can take advantage of them, or any subgroups of the whites. Asian, Arabs, and Hispanics are subgroups of the white culture. They can come in and dominate black folk and advantage themselves. That's the whole point of immigration, to take advantage of black folk and be a foundation for wealth in this country for everybody but black folk.
Interesting. Well, what really stood out to me, Dr. Anderson, was when you, in your book, Black Labor, White Wealth, which people can actually pick up a copy of that at powernomics.com, you mentioned that around the turn of the century, you were comparing specifically Hispanics to black people. You said that there were about 100,000 Hispanics in the United States, and there were 9 million black people. And that's 90 to 1. I couldn't believe it. I was blown away because that's not the reality that we see now. You said the birth rates remained equal, but yet now we've become kind of a minority within the group of so-called minorities because of these immigration policies. And we're supportive. Like, we really believe that this is actually beneficial to us. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I will. And I congratulate you for having such a fine memory and recall ability. You're exactly right. See, at the end of the Civil War, Dr. Watkins, you had approximately about 4,000 to 5,000 Hispanics. And as a matter of fact, they weren't even called Hispanics at that time. They were called Chicanos and Latinos. because they come up with what they call New Spain. Everything south of the border was called New Spain, Mexico. That was all New Spain. And they brought about 4 million blacks in there to dig in the mines and for jewelry, chrome, gold, and silver, and send it to Spain. So you had about 4,000 blacks, people of Spanish descent, floating around in the Southwest at that time. They were not called Hispanics. They didn't become Hispanics until they found out that in 1975 they're going to displace black folk, and so they changed and they said we got to pick a label that would not include black folk. We can't use the word Chicano, because they've been married with, they've interbred with Indians and blacks. We can't use the word Latinos because that has blackness in it. So they came up with this whole concept called Hispanics that came into existence starting about 1975. But going back to history to answer your question, that they only had about 4,000 so-called, use the word so-called Hispanics in the United States at that time. But you had 4.5 to 5 million black folk in the United States. And so you have to use your mathematics to determine what percentage of the country was Hispanic at that time, when you had only 4,000 of them and almost 5 million blacks. Now let's jump up from 1860, from the Civil War all the way up to 1900. In 1900, the Hispanic population in here, or what you call the Hispanic population, or Latinos and Chicanos, had moved up to 100,000. You had a 100,000 period in the entire United States. But at that point in time, you had 11 million to 12 million blacks, okay? And so you got 100,000 Hispanics and 11 to 12 million black folk. Now, for the next 100 years, they got the same identical birth rate in the country. And so let's move up from 1900, using the same birth rate, until 2000. And guess what happened? Is that the Hispanics went had a 55,000% increase in their birth, in their population, where blacks went up 300 to 400%. And so they passed black folk. And so and in 1975, I told you, when they became Hispanics, what they said is this: when they met out in Kansas City and said, one of the first thing we're going to do is use the label Hispanic, so we can pull in and everybody together that speaks Spanish any place on this earth, any place in America, because we're going to take these black folk out. And the first thing on their agenda was this, is that they want to surpass black people by year 2000 and displace black folk in everything, from not only from businesses, from economics, from politics, and from population, and begin to make black folk third-class citizens. Blacks had been second-class citizens up until the year 2000, but by the massive increase in Hispanics, by the year 2000, they made blacks third-class citizens. And now what you got in the United States now, 16, 18 years later, you now got 57 million Hispanics and 44 million blacks. So look at the calculation. They went from 100,000 to 57 million. Okay, and so blacks went from 12,000 up to 44. That means their percentage went up by 300%. Hispanics went over 57,000%. Wow.
Dr. Claud Anderson, that's who I'm speaking with, everybody who's asking about the conversation. We're talking about everything from Donald Trump and racism to the 14th Amendment, but also immigration policy. Some of y'all who were in last night on drboycetv.com, you might have been a part of the conversation we had about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning last night. You can still watch it. If you missed it, go back and watch it. What we did was we did a quick powernomics lesson. It took about an hour, and we went through chapter 5 in the book, Black Labor, White Wealth. And we were talking about the immigration thing, in terms of what they're telling you in the media. MSNBC, CNN, and Fox all have their perspectives on what's going on, for example, with this caravan, with immigration policy. And I think it's important for black people to be able to come to the table and say, here is our opinion, and our opinion is unique, it is different, it is disconnected from what everybody else is saying, because it uniquely reflects our interests. Now, I want to ask you this, Dr. Anderson. What do you say to the people, who might come up, and feel that, by speaking on these issues, by talking about the way this influx of people from south of the border has hurt black people, what do you say to those people who say, oh, that's racist, that's wrong, that's unethical for you to say that, you're being hateful, you're trying to be anti-immigrant? Well, how do you respond to people when they give you that kind of criticism?
First of all, I could be very, very bold and bodacious, just call me ignorant. They don't understand the nature of racism. Anybody that talks about racism and does not apply to strictly between the competitive relationship between blacks and whites, are either stuck on stupid or they're playing games with you. Racism doesn't apply to anybody but black people and whites. That's what the racism, the concept of racism never existed in public political dialogue until the 1500s. It came in at the same time with enslavement of black folk. But now they're playing games with you. They're trying to intellectually misdirect you and give you fake news and fake suggestions and distort and corrupt the concepts of racism. Racism is a competitive relationship between people who are competing for the ownership and the control of land, resources, wealth, and power, and to use it to impede and slow down, Jim Crow, segregate, and enslave another group under what they call a doctrine of unequal exchange that came in the 1500s. That was between blacks and whites. And the race, and so in all these nations, all these subcategories of people now that you all call a race, like the Hispanics, or like the Jews, or like these very religious groups, or the Arabs, those are not races. Those are language groups, they're religious groups, and they're tribal groups. They have nothing to do with racism. Racism is a direct relationship between blacks and whites that started in about 1503, where you find the race started with 9 European nations, Dr. Watkins. 9 European nations. That was England, France, Germany, Britain, Sweden, Norwegians. Everybody jumped in and said, let's use black folks under the doctrine of unequal exchange. We're going to go to Africa and pick up these blacks for about $20 or $25 a piece and sell them at about a 1,500% profit margin in any place on the earth. Then we're going to exploit them. And they get nothing out of it except we give them Bible and beads, or some flags, some clothes, let them dance and sing. That's it. And we're gonna make money off of them. That began the racism. The race started with those 9 European nations, and now where are we gonna use this? They said, let's get to the Americas. Columbus just discovered North America, Central America, South America. That is land over there that's available. And since capitalism is based on who owns and controls the lands and the resources, let's go get it. So a race started. A race, R-A-C-E, is a contest. A race, it was a horse race, bicycle race, foot race, with any kind of race. A race itself is a contest. And all these countries started getting in and say, who can get to the Americas the quickest and get the most land and bring in the most blacks and make the most wealth off it. And that went on from about the 1500s all the way up until 1860. And by 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, the race ended because all the nations that were participating in that race had now enriched themselves off of black people in this country, in Latin America, and Central America. The race was over. That was ended. And when the race ended, they took that word, Dr. Watkins, R-A-C-E, and they extracted, deleted, cut off the E, and left only a R-A-C. And then they took a suffix called I-S-M. The suffix means maintain the prevailing conditions on something. And they took that ISM, Dr. Watkins, and stuck it onto RAC. That's where the word racism came from. And all the people that came to this nation and around the world, they've already benefited. All the Hispanics, the Arabs, the Asians, the French, the American Indians, the Jews, everybody's already exploited and benefited blacks in that 360-year period. They're not a race, but the reason they dilute it down is by pretending somehow that they have been victimized, even though they were the enslavers. And they're going to try to replace black folks in image and say, we're just as bad off as those slaves. And we're the offsprings of a slaveholding nation, a slaveholding culture, or a slaveholding group, but we are bad off as blacks. And there's a difference. Black folk are exceptional people. Every group of human beings in gender, in religion, in culture, in sex have exploited, misused, abused, and profited from the exploiting and misuse of black folk.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Anderson, I'm sitting there, I'm clicking around because I'm looking at the different opinions and the different thoughts, that are coming from people. And I see a lot of interesting people in here that I just respect. I see Michi X is in here from Fly Nubian Queen, and she has a very powerful voice, and a lot of people pay attention to what she has to say. And I think that the reason that it's important for people like, the Michi X's and myself and others to hear from you is because, none of us are learning this stuff in school. None of us really learned how all this works, where all this came from. A lot of us get our political civics education from watching MSNBC and all that, and CNN and Fox and whatever you watch. And a lot of it's a lot. A lot of it is shaped. It's a morph reality designed to help certain people achieve a certain objective, where black people have been used as political pawns to help other people achieve various goals, right? So, so this is interesting. So what you're saying here is that a lot of it starts off from the doctrine of unequal exchange, and that knowing how that, which was in the 1500s, and that racism, if we're thinking about racism, you think of it as a contest to take care of your own, to get access to resources, to control power. And now it's sort of been, I guess, because of liberal social engineering, they've added that ism. And now you're hearing the word racism usually being used in media in situations that don't involve Black people. Like the last 10 to 12 times I heard the word racism in media in reference to Donald Trump was not him dealing with Black folks. It was him dealing with Hispanics. And anybody that knows anything about Hispanics, they know that all Hispanics are not descendants of slaves. That they're just, a lot of them are just white people who speak Spanish, that they were descendants of slaveholders. So you have a situation where the word racism is being used to describe the way Trump feels about other descendants of slaveholders, right? Is that accurate? Did I say that right?
That's it. And you're right on target. And let me jump in 1 second and just help you along. Now, I told you the race ended in 1860. In 1860, why did it end? Because all the resources had been maldistributed. Because of the Constitution, the whole purpose of slavery. Now, watch this now. The whole purpose of slavery was a very specific something to be done. It was intentionally designed to maldistribute almost 100% of all this nation's land, minerals, wealth, resources, privileges, businesses, incomes, and rights and controls of all levels of government into the hands of the dominant white society. That's what the 360 years of slavery was for. And that was constitutionally endowed and codified to make sure that it's right. So by 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, everything was over. It had been completed. At that point in time, everything had been maldistributed. Now watch this now. At that point in time, everybody who would come to this country, all those about 30-something million whites who would come to this country to get benefits and get on you and and enjoy the fruits of Black slavery, they had them by 1860. And so what happened? And now you got the European whites and all these other groups. They are 100-foot giants built on the assets they had accumulated. Black people, though, were in a ditch. They didn't own and control anything. You had about 250, 67,000 Blacks who were free. They'd accumulate about 1/2 or 1% of anything of value. So you got a half-inch midget and 100-foot white giants. Half-inch midget is black midgets competing against. So at that point, the race was over, and that's why they took the E off of race. Now I told you earlier what ISM meant. It means suffix means maintain the prevailing conditions. If whites are now a mountain and Black folks are a valley, racism means do not let those conditions between those two change in any degree. Racism means maintain the status quo that exists between Blacks and whites, not maintain the conditions that exist between the subcultures of whites and Hispanics, or whites and Arabs, or whites and Asians, or whites and women, or whites and American Indians. It's make sure the conditions between Blacks and whites don't change. That means let no resources change. And so what happened then, you had the guy that came in, Charles Darwin, came in and says about the Darwinism, survival of the fittest and the strongest. And he came out with a whole concept called the survival of the species in 1859, right at the time of the Civil War. He came out with this whole concept of Charles Darwin's survival of the fittest and the strongest. And what he said, Dr. Watkins, is what is the greatest in the scale of acceptability and power and wealth? Is it the mountain or is it the valley and the ditch? Or he said, and he did it with animals, saying, what is the most powerful and the highest in the academic scale of intellectual achievement and humanity and humanism? Is it more important for the elephant, or is it a blade of grass comparatively, or an amoeba? Mm-hmm. Which ranks higher in power? And so they got the human. So he came up with this thing wrote these concepts about Darwinism. And so obviously, an elephant is more important in the evolutionary change than an amoeba or a rat or a mouse. And so they did. So at that time, since Blacks own nothing and whites own and control everything, they say, hey, obviously whites are superior to Blacks. If we were not superior to you all, you wouldn't be in the ditch, and we wouldn't be on top of the mountain. He excluded the fact that you've been systematically deprived, misused, and abused, okay, through the doctrine of unequal exchange. And so at that point, he said, now, so blacks are inferior and whites are superior. And so at that point in time, the whole concept of racism switched from being economics. It makes sure nothing moves in the black hands. They be opposed to any reparations. They were opposed to 40 acres and a mule and $100 for black folk. They were, when blacks were set free, they said, we not only won't give you 40 acres and a mule and $100, we're going to turn you loose without any money, any clothes, any land, any businesses, any religion, any education, any animals, any tools, and any weapons, to make sure you can't there will be no, that you cannot defeat racism. You're going to be left with the term they use called root hog or die, which means we're going to leave you off the root hog. That means like a hog digs in the ground to try to find a root, something to eat. So that's why most of those blacks that were free in the slavery, guess what? A lot of them went off after the end of slavery. They didn't have any education, didn't have any money, didn't have any businesses. And a lot of them wanted to get back to the plantation. Say, at least on the plantation, we can have a ear of corn and some piece of fat back. And so they said, my black folk love slavery. They just want to get back. They said, we can get something, because now the racism says you're not going to get anything. That's why today whites are still opposed to affirmative action, reparations, anything for black folk. That's racism. But see, that does not affect Hispanics. Hispanics can come in here tomorrow and be treated as whites. 70% Hispanics were always whites up until 1970, and they saw us call themselves a minority. Arabs were the first enslaved of black folk. Now they come in here, and here's the conclusion. I know I'm taking too long to answer this question.
No.
Okay, when all these people come in here now, all the descendants of slaveholders, when they come in, they got 5 advantages over black folk because of racism. Racism has constrained black folks, and you're going to never be amount to anything. We're going to never allow you to have anything. You'll always be a permanent minority in population, permanent minority in owning and controlling anything. That's why you had 1/2 of 1% of the wealth in 1860. You still have 1/2 of 1%. There's nothing of value in the entire United States or any place in the world where black people can control more than 1/2 of 1%. Even though in the world population, blacks make up 25% of the world population, you still can't get more than 1/2 of 1%. And so you can't compete with that. There's no way that 1/2 going to run over 99 and 1/2. Can't be done. You can play all these games about voting and civil rights and all that stuff, and they've corrupted those concepts. You ain't gonna make it. And I'll let you get in to respond to that. And I got some other additional information tied to that.
I think it's a great point. I want to hear that additional information. I want to make sure everybody knows I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson. He's the author of many books that I keep right by my side: Black Labor, White Wealth, Powernomics, the Black History Reader. And when I say I keep them by my side, I'm not playing. I'm not joking with y'all. And also Dirty Little Secrets. And so I would argue that if you want your kids to get a good education on history, Black history, and how things work in America, have them read those 4 books and have them read them again and again and again and again and again. Because reading it once ain't enough. It's like it's a little bit like, closest thing I think of is like reading the Bible. You can't read the Bible one time and get it all in one reading. You got to read it over and over and keep referencing it so you can understand who the heck you are. And that's more important than anything they'll learn in school. And so if you want to get copies of the books, you can actually go to powernomics.com. That's powernomics.com. Also, Dr. Claud Anderson runs a think tank with his wonderful wife, Joanne, who's also a professor. And the Harvest Institute is one of the few Black think tanks that I know of out here that's really advocating for Black people. They file lawsuits on behalf of Black people for reparations, things like that. These things are expensive. They cost money. So please, find it in your heart to support the Harvest Institute. Add it to your budget, just a few dollars a month. Just take all the money that you're giving white folks every month, because I know all y'all giving money to white folks. We all are. And just take maybe 5% of that and put that toward the Harvest Institute to make sure that you're helping yourself at least 5% as much as you're helping white folks, right? Just 5% as much. That's all we're asking. Now, if you want to really go far, then maybe it should be equal, 50-50, but that's a hard transition. The addiction to white supremacy is deep. It's hard to break away from the love-hate relationship we have with white folks, but I encourage you to reconsider that abusive relationship and to understand how economically you're being screwed. So the URL is powernomics.com, harvestinstitute.org. The other thing I want to ask everybody is if you're watching anywhere, hit the like button, share button, thumbs up button. Also, don't forget that tonight in the Black Business School, we're doing a lecture on how to shift your thinking, shift your schedule, shift your strategy when you go from being an employee or AKA a corporate slave to being a free Black man, free Black woman, or entrepreneur business owner. There's a way you have to shift. We're going to do a lecture on that tonight at 8 o'clock. If you want to know more, visit drboyceseminars.com. That's drboyceseminars.com. So, Dr. Anderson, I want to ask you about something. And I'd like to hear also what you said. You said you wanted to add to that discussion. I was looking through what we were talking about last night when I had a few hundred other crazy Negroes like myself on the internet. You know, I'll hop into YouTube at literally 4 o'clock in the morning, and there'll be Black people jumping right in. I just love it. Some of them live as far away as England and China, and for them it's like the middle of the day. So these are my friends, and so one of the things that came up in your book, Black Labor, White Wealth, on page, let me turn this thing off. Sorry about that. My phone is making a noise. There we go. Is a conversation about what it means to be a minority. Kind of this idea that, being a minority, everybody is some type of minority. You mentioned in the book, you said the definition of minority continues to expand and to become more amorphous. Meaning people just don't know what it really means. It kind of means anybody that's not a white male, apparently. Today, almost everyone is a minority in some way. Anything that applies to every group has no real meaning for any group. However, the term minority holds major political advantage for those who wish to maintain a status quo. Blacks are further undermined when included in a minority category because none of the other so-called minorities were statutorily deprived by the government of their humanity or their right to enjoy the fruits of their own labor. And also, it seems to me that you've added that that they don't even align with us politically when they come to the country. Most of the Hispanics that come from south of the border, they check the census and they fill out Caucasian. They say, hey, I'm still white. When it matters, when it's good to be white, I'm gonna be white. But when it comes to time to get the benefits and steal the benefits from Black people, I'm gonna be a minority. Can you kind of talk about that in terms of just what we should at least understand about how this system's kind of confusing us and leading us to make bad decisions?
I'll be glad to, but it never ceases to amaze me how easy it is for everybody to trick Black folk, and it's been going on for 460 years, almost 500 years, and it seems like we can't get it in our heads, and that is so comical that it's really sad. But the concept of minority, see, if you were to go back to the 1970 census, the 1960 up until 1970, the census only had two groups in there, and that was between Blacks and whites. That's what the whole civil rights movement about. The civil rights movement, the fight of the 1960s, wasn't all about Hispanics and Arabs, and it was about Blacks and whites all over the country. And so minority, they threw that minority in there after 1969 benign neglect was proclaimed by President Nixon, and they said, and they can say, well, Black folks by 1970, so there going to be some benefits for Black folk because affirmative action is coming on scenes. I wrote the first affirmative action plan after the United States Constitution. I wrote it for the state of Florida in 1970, 1971. But I wrote that. It wasn't writing for minorities. I was writing it for poor people, not for poor people, but for Black people, not for genders. Because you see, really, in reality, white men are a minority. Everybody's a minority. And so they said, what we're going to do, let's use that same scheme that was used in the Constitution, using euphemisms, using very broad and ambiguous terms to extract anything that possibly could go to Black folk. Let's suck it out and spread it out and thin it out so that anybody could benefit down to the neutralized Black folk out. And they started again, and that's why the Freedmen's Bureau was wiped out. Didn't you know that? Because the Freedmen's Bureau was put in place in 1860 for Black folk. But guess what? Whites began to suck everything out of it. That's how whites in the South got the land back. Because you see, they're supposed to give Black folk land under 40 acres a mule and $100, but they went around and said, well, the Freedmen's Bureau should be for everybody. And so therefore, those Southern whites, poor whites and rich whites in the South after the Civil War came back in through the Freedmen's Bureau and picked up all the damn land. The money was put in there to be given to Black folk, to help Black folks start a new life, to buy some clothes, to have some food on the table. The whites took all that out. And so they said, well, this is the same scheme that was used in the Constitution about use broad terms like we the people, all the people, and pretend it somehow includes black folk, and they know it didn't. So every time anything comes up, they come up with some terms, Dr. Watkins, very broad and ambiguous terms, so that everybody could come in and get to the table in the pot to make sure there's nothing left for black folk. That's what racism is based on. That's called the doctrine of unequal exchange, which means if any pot is put on the table, make sure you divide it up and water it down so that black folk will know the difference, so they're not getting anything out of it. And that's why slavery and the legacy of slavery have continued to exist up to the present time. Black folk haven't gotten any benefits. Nobody has addressed the points of slavery. What was the purpose? Nobody's corrected that. And every time something put on the table to help black folk, they broaden it so everybody can get it. That's why right now Hispanics, Arabs, and Asians are going to displace black folk in every job in the United States. They're going to displace you out of politics. They're going to displace you out of businesses. They're going to displace you in education. They're going to displace blacks in all respect by pretending somehow that all people have contributed equally to develop this land, and therefore they're equal to black folk, even though they weren't even in the country for 400 years. They weren't even here. Black folk are the oldest people in the country. Weren't any Hispanics of any here. Weren't any Arabs or Asians. Now, why are they now put into an affirmative action program and say for minorities? Black folk are silly to even use the word, because now minorities mean poor people without anything. And they use that, and people of color, minorities, and diversity. Those are broad terms to maintain racism, which means that let no resources, power, wealth, income, businesses, educational achievement go from white hands to black hands.
Everybody who's watching on Facebook and Instagram, if you want to follow us and see Dr. Anderson face to face, you can actually go to drboycetv.com. So I want to ask you, Dr. Anderson, your book, Black Labor, White Wealth, on page 94, there's a part where you talk about, you hit on something in this page that makes me think about, when I'm hearing members of the Democratic Party and many of their black political operatives and their political servants on television telling black people that we need to get behind the Democratic agenda on immigration. We need to act like that their treatment of illegal immigrants, that somehow affects us. And we need to get behind all of this. And the reason I have an issue with that is that I can't really see the political benefit for black people when we're supporting these immigration policies that have harmed us for so long. And one of the reasons is you actually referenced on page 94, you said ethnic immigrants learn early, and one of the last things that they forget is to avoid contact with America's black pariah. Other groups can blend in or assimilate into the dominant culture. Black skin color does not permit them to blend. And then you also, so you point out the fact that when people come here, they've already been told through media, through government policy and everything else, avoid the blacks. You ain't got nothing in common with these people. As long as you stay away from the Negroes, we won't treat you like one. And a lot of them listen to that. So these imaginary political coalitions that we claim to have with people that come from south of the border, they just don't seem to exist. When you see something that's really affecting black people, you don't see major Hispanic organizations really getting behind it the way they really could. And the other point that I wanted to read to, and I'd like to get your thought on this, is that you mentioned this. You said, across this nation, laws were enacted defining who was black. These laws established strict standards for whiteness, declaring that 1/4, 1/16, or even one drop of black blood made a person black. While conversely, no amount of white blood in the human body could dominate a single drop of black blood. So you can have a body full of white blood, but if you got one drop of black blood, then you're black. No other ethnic population in the nation, including those with visibly non-white biological features, have ever been so rigidly defined. The one drop rule was once used as a standard by the U.S. Census, saying that if you have one drop of this poisonous, dirty, nasty, tainted, toxic black blood, then that makes you a nigger. And we do not mess with niggers. And can you speak to that, Dr. Anderson, and tell me what comes to mind as you kind of hear what I just read from your book?
Right. See, and that's out of fear. The greatest fear that this country has in the white society and in the Arab society and in the Hispanic societies and in the gender societies, every society, the greatest fear is black folk. You know why? Because black folk are exceptional people. They're special people. And if I were them, I'll be scared too, because see, black folk are the oldest people on earth. They are the original people on earth. And that makes them very special. In this country, they were the exceptional people. They were the engines that drove the development, not only of economics in this country, but they were black labor created the industrial revolutions, Dr. Watkins, in Europe and throughout the Americas. It was always black labor around the world that created all these industrial revolutions. And so consequently, blackness is power. Whether you go into the universe and in the heavens, the most powerful things in the universe are the black holes that are more powerful than the sun. As a matter of fact, the black holes in space are so powerful they can suck the sun into it and destroy it. It's 20 times more stronger and powerful than the sun. Blackness in the universe is strong and powerful. On the earth, the strongest, most powerful thing on this earth is blackness. Whites know that. They know that. And they're scared of that. And all groups are scared of blackness. And so you come to this earth, we got stuff called black cloth that is so powerful it can make white cloth, make anything disappear. We got the strongest vegetables and fruits are the darkest skinned vegetables. That's a blackness. They're scared of blackness. And the same thing in color. If you're in a color spectrum, you look at a color spectrum, you look at all the colors in a child's color book with a pink, yellow, brown, green, whatever it might be. The most dominant color is blackness. And you see, because all colors come out of black, there's no color in whiteness. That's the dominant. And so blackness can dominate whiteness if they turn it loose, let it free. That's why it must be contained through racism and keep it under control. And that's why nobody can bring it up. And so consequently, if you start talking about blood, that's why they passed laws like in 1924, saying the law says 1 drop of black blood to make you black, because it's that powerful. You can have 2 gallons of red blood in your body, you can call white blood, but 1 drop of black blood will tear it up, beat the hell out of it, wipe it out. That's how powerful it is. So they ain't gonna let you get, blackness is power. But see, the problem though, is that black folk are scared of blackness themselves. That's your problem. Their strongest strength, their power, they're running from it. Instead of running to it, they run from it. And if they're gonna be powerful in this country, all they got to do is to come together and unite around the strongest thing in the country, which is blackness. And you didn't hear me say anything about African America. Native black Americans are the strongest thing. And now you say, well, this Native Indians, there ain't no such thing as a Native Indians. What are the Indians in the country? They came in here about 10,000 years after black folk were here already. And they interbred with black folk and create what you call Native Americans, but they're getting all the advantages and benefits. Everybody benefits from blackness except black people. Black folk have enriched every group on earth except their own people. And so that's your problem, is that they're running from blackness because blackness is powerful and whites know it. And they don't want to be, and it's power. And if blacks were ever to come together and practice group economics and group politics, they can dominate this country, even though they are a minority. And they are planned minority. They're the only permanent planned minority, subordinated people. They have no friends. They have no allies. This stuff what the Democratic Party is talking about, that's not going to ally black folk or do anything for black folk. Blacks have never had any friends and allies. And see, the question you asked about politics, the question is black folks shouldn't be voting for anybody or any immigrant groups until 2 things. With immigrants, you must say, if you're going to continue to bring in all these immigrants, you must put black people into a protected class. So all these immigrants coming to the country cannot compete with blacks, nor suck things out of black folk, or exploit black folk, or overuse black folk, or displace black folk. And see, if you haven't heard one black sitting on TV who's supposed to have a damn college education, have enough sense to figure that out. They go on TV every damn day and become a imposter, a betrayer of their own people. And by selling them out, trying to carry water for anybody else. You haven't heard one in politics, economics, or the civil rights movement say blackness should be protected. You are the people that built this country. And the greatest insult that adds to injury is for you to pretend that all people coming to this country have contributed equally to the development of this nation. That's a lie. Black people were the people that built the roads, the highways, the bridges, that fought in every war. They're the most patriotic people. But see, nobody speaks up for black folk except the 2 of us. That's Dr. Watkins and Claud Anderson keep telling him, you're going about it wrong. But blacks are special people. I call them exceptional people. And as long as you call them native blacks, not African Americans, this nation owes black folk recognition, appreciation, and reparations.
Everybody, I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson. He's the author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Black History Reader, and Dirty Little Secrets. If you want to go take a look at his books for your children, for your family, go to powernomics.com. Also, the harvestinstitute.org, O-R-G, the Harvest Institute, or it's harvestinstitute.org, that's the URL. Go there if you'd like to find out more about the Harvest Institute. Support. I know I support. I do everything I can to help. But also, I need your help in terms of supporting our institutions. The reason some groups have power is because they have strong institutions, and I want that for the Black community. I believe we can have that in a generation if we do things right now. Do me a favor, everybody, please hit the like button, the share button, and the subscribe button. And also, if you want to join us tonight in the seminar I'm going to do online, you can find out more about it at drboyceseminars.com. It's for people that want to quit their jobs or either have and are looking for a way to move forward in terms of thinking like a CEO, thinking like a business owner, as opposed to thinking like an employee. So drboyceseminars.com. And also, if you want to join our League of Intelligent Black People, you can go to intelligentblackpeople.com. So that's a lot of URLs, but somebody can type that in. I'd appreciate it. Now, Dr. Anderson, let me tell you this. This links to a little bit of the Donald Trump conversation, Republican, Democrat, and I don't put you in any sort of box politically, but it's funny. My mama, I just saw my mama. It actually just came in, and she's watching the conversation. And I'm not gonna tell anybody who she is because I don't want nobody chasing down my mama. But my mother loves you. She likes what you stand for. And let me just say this: my mother's not into the liberal agenda. She has a big problem with a lot of things that come out of the mouths of the Democratic Party, and I love her and I respect her. In fact, a lot of the Black folks I know, they have what I call old school common sense values. I believe Black people inherently, a lot of times we're very conservative people in certain areas. We're also very smart in terms of knowing when somebody's trying to fool us. The smart ones are very smart. The sheep are tend to follow the crowd. But I want to kind of ask you this. How did Black people, who I believe, when I go to the church, I see conservative people. When I go out into the communities and I'm talking to people, and I'm talking to Black folks who are not the ones that you're going to see on TV, they're just conservative. When I listen to Vicky Dillard at Fly Nubian Queen from the Nation of Islam, very conservative, but very strong pro-Black. How did we get to the point where we decided that as a community, most of us are going to align with, say, the Democrats versus any other party? I'm an independent, but I just found that interesting. A lot of times I used to feel real awkward being around white liberals because they believed a whole lot of stuff that I didn't believe. I would think that some of what they believed was just bullshit, but I was told that this is what I was supposed to do because that's what everybody did. How did that happen? What's the history of that?
Well, the most that came out of the first beginning of that came out of about 1935, after the Great Depression had destroyed, it ravaged the country economically and politically. At that point in time, about 1935, the country began to the Great Depression began coming to an end, and they began to start rebuilding the country. At that point in time, Black people had said, well, for the last 20 years we were into Blackness, but we're going to start rebuilding the country. And rather than being Black, this is what the Black politicians and Black civil rights leaders and Black ministers start saying, let's not be Black anymore. Let's move what we call universality. As a term they came up with. Universality means let's be for everybody, pretend that we're not special, we're not Black. And that started about in the late 1930s. And then it really progressed into the 1940s. At that point in time, they wanted to be associated not with having a Black community anymore, a Black business, a Black anything. They were looking for integration. And so when the first thing that jumped up was the baseball teams, because we had about 2 Black baseball leagues that had about 6 teams that nobody could beat our Black baseball players. We had our own basketball teams. We had our own football teams. We had our own Black schools. But they said, well, it's too much Blackness. And so Rick, I can't think of his name now, Branch Rickey said, you know what? You got all these Black baseball teams that we can't beat them. What if we were to practice a doctrine of unequal exchange in his mind because of his conditioning? What if we were to take one Black boy and bring him into the Brooklyn Dodgers And then when tell the black folk, get rid of all your black baseball teams. We'll take one of your black players. Let them play with us in the Bulldogs. You get rid of all those black players. You got about 500 black baseball players. Get rid of them. Close down those stadiums. Get rid of all that equipment and teams, and we'll take one of yours. And they did it. Then they did the same thing in the basketball team. Wiped out all the black basketball teams and took 2 or 3 blacks that played basketball with white teams. Then they did the same thing. Then they said, "Oh, how about the schools?" They said, "Well, let's try to see if we can get our schools integrated too." And so I pushed for integration by the late 1940s. But would you hear a Jew say that? A Jew would never say, "I'm gonna get rid of Brandeis University so I can go so I can get along with Baptists and Catholics." You never hear Catholics say, "I'm gonna get rid of Catholic University and Notre Dame if I can go be with Protestants." Black folk are silly. They always get caught. As I told you, whites can wave some red cloth and they'll come running and get caught, tricked every time. And so they gave up their own basketball teams, baseball teams, and later on, by the 1950s, started giving up their music. And so here comes Elvis Presley and everybody else, and Bill Haley in the comments taking over black music. Didn't get blacks anything. They closed down all the black music by using crossover music, and then all the singers and dancers got out. That's not black music. The rappers, that's not black music. Blacks gave up everything: their businesses, their communities, their history, their culture, their leadership. Everything was given up for a doctrine of unequal exchange. They got nothing in return for it. Integration gave black folk nothing, and they lost everything. And but I'm getting close to one of the other points. Let me jump off one point, because you asked me something earlier that recurred to my mind. You asked me about the 14th Amendment with Donald Trump, and and about. This is the big thing now about what Donald Trump says he's going to oppose and execute an executive order to declare immigrants coming to this country as non-eligible for citizenship. And see, even though I have no interest in Donald Trump in general, but he was absolutely right. He's right. You know why? Because the 13th Amendment. I'm gonna say this to you, and you hold it as a quote. You put quote signs on the beginning and end. What the 13th Amendment said was that it stated that all persons. This is in the Freedmen Bureau, and it went into effect. I told you earlier. Okay, it came out of that was the 13th Amendment, Freedmen Bureau. It says that all persons of African descent born in the United States are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. Now, it says that was the 14th Amendment and naturalization. They can see that it's strictly for the slaves that were entitled to have rights in this country. It says African of descent. It did not say anything about Hispanics that are immigrating to America, migrating. It didn't say anything about Arabs or anybody else. It was about black people. But that was the basis of the 14th Amendment. And it says that, and based on that, it says that it is obligated, mandated upon all levels of government to exercise all necessary means, Dr. Watkins, to lift the badges and incidents of slavery off the shoulders of black people. And all these things are put in place, the 13th and 14th Amendment, but they put in their place to correct the Dred Scott decision of 1857, which was about black folk. The Supreme Court that was maintaining as the guardian of racism to make sure that black folk never get anything. In 1857, in the Taney decision, the Supreme Court says that black people and a black man has no rights that a white person is bound to respect in 1857. So these things came in 1860. They were strictly and solely for black folk. But I give whites credit and the white power structure. They have been systematically excellent in engineering euphemisms, broad, ambiguous terms to dilute and water down all the things that would have benefited black folk under the aegis of racism. So they get nothing in return for anything they do. And anything that should go to black folk is watered down and sprayed to everybody so that black folk get nothing. That's why right now in this country, black folk are on the verge of being eradicated from the face of the earth here and in Africa. Because again, they're using broad terms on them. Minorities, poor folk, diversity, multicultural. And even in 1862, the Attorney General for the United States said that black people can never be people of color. This was a federal Attorney General statement. period. And so why is black folk now talking about we're people of color when a Supreme Court general ruled in 1862 that black people would never be treated as color, therefore they're not qualified in the benefits. That's why they could not be in the land rushes to get free land in the United States. They're not entitled to it. That's what racism is. Racism said, let black folk get nothing. That's why they're exactly where they were in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. They're at the bottom, the lowest ranking. That's why in the book, Black Reader, the first thing you read is about the social construct that was put into place by the Constitution. And you look at that in 1789. Look at that document that came out. See that map in it? You see that map in there? Go to the second question. See where black folk are. See what black folk, see that shows you in 2012 how black folk rank compared to all ethnic groups or religious groups in this country. And those are not racist. What they've done now, they confuse racism by pretending somehow that racism is equal. That's it. Look at the bottom of that. See who's at the bottom of that.
Oh, black people. Yeah.
Okay. Everybody. What year was that? What year was that put out by the federal government? What year?
2014.
Okay, 214. So how you that after 500 years, you're still on the bottom beneath everybody? That's racism. Racism is controlling and manipulating resources to make sure black folks stay on the bottom. Now you can go vote, and you're voting. Why would you vote for anybody? And I want blacks to vote. I'm not opposed to voting. I'm opposed to black folk voting and not getting anything in return for their vote. I'm not against immigrants. I'm against this nation's immigration policies that keep subordinating, explaining, and let everybody walk all over and use black folk. But again, I'm disappointed because I can't find enough black folk in America. I spent my whole life, all my resources, my energy, and my youth, and my intellect writing for black folk, researching and explaining these things to them. Most of them don't even go to buy the damn books, and those that do buy them don't even read them. They simply let people on TV try to pretend that somehow that Hispanics, Arabs, and Asians and other groups are equal to black folk. And rather than saying black folk are special people, they must be put into a protected class, and nobody should be able to compete with them and suck and extract anything out of them anymore.
Well, I'm looking at this chart here, and it's real interesting. I mean, when you go all the way back to 1967, right? And I want everybody to pay attention. This is before, Dr. King in the passage of the Civil Rights Act and everything else, all these so-called advances that we allegedly have. In 1967, the ranking was blacks at the bottom, Hispanics, then non-white Hispanic, right? And then Asians came into the chart around the 80s. I guess that's when they started collecting the data. But black people were at the bottom in 1967, right? Now, you learned in school that things got so much better, that we had all these improvements because of the civil rights marches and this integration thing, right? Well, when you fast forward and you go to 2014, which is just 4 years ago, the ranking is Asians at the top. Non-white Hispanic is number 2 at $60,300 a year. Third is Hispanic, $42,500. Last place is blacks at $35,400. In fact, the Asian total is more than double that of blacks. Asians, $74,300. For black people, is $35,400. And remember, Asian people don't really vote that much. Their voting participation rate is very, very low. So anybody who would try to argue that voting is critical for us to improve the condition of the community is either misinformed or they're lying to you. Because votes do matter. Votes certainly matter. There's a reason why they try to suppress votes and all that. But the thing is, voting does not matter for black folks in terms of improving our condition based on the way politics is being played right now. Votes matter to the people that you're keeping in power. So there's a reason why the Democrats will always fight harder for your right to vote than they will ever fight for your right to have reparations, right? They will always fight for your right to show up to the polls more than they'll fight for your right to reverse mass incarceration, right? They will always fight harder to get you to vote for them than they will to protect your communities and uplift your community. So Dr. Anderson, I appreciate that. I think, and I want to tell everybody, this book is called The Black History Reader. And if you've read any Dr. Anderson's books, let me know if you've read the books. They're really good reads. They're not just informative and powerful with unique information that you will not get at any university that I know of in this country, on this planet, but also there's references. I mean, he's got deep appendices of citations and all. Very solid scholarly work, but it's eligible for anybody that is literate. Anybody here that knows how to read can read through these books, and your children can read. I had all my kids read your books, Dr. Anderson, and what it does is it just shifts your thinking. It just says, oh my gosh, this is a wake-up call, like a cup of coffee. And so anybody who wants to go check out the books and get a copy for your family, Dr. Anderson has a whole package where you can spend $99 and get all the books plus a DVD. If you go to powernomics.com, that's powernomics.com. I want to challenge everybody. I think we really need to have a Powernomics challenge. Everybody does these internet challenges. In fact, I'm going to start using the hashtag Powernomics Challenge. And I want everybody watching to use the hashtag Powernomics Challenge. And the Powernomics Challenge is this. I want you to get at least a copy of Powernomics. I hope you get all 4 of the books, but if you can't, just get one. Just at least get Powernomics. At least get one, preferably get all of them. And I want you to take a picture of yourself holding your book. I'll be the first one on the hashtag. Take a picture of yourself holding the book, or holding all of them, or sitting with your kids holding the books, one of your kids reading the books, or whatever it is. And I want you to use that hashtag Powernomics Challenge. And I'm going to share that. I'm going to talk about that in my live stream. I'll feature your family. I'll talk about what you're doing, and I'm going to check that hashtag. So, Dr. Anderson, I literally just thought of that just now, but I was thinking that this would be perfect because Christmas is coming. And that's also when all the financial coonery starts to happen. That's when we start going crazy, spending money, getting all our money to white folks to buy nonsense stuff that ain't going to do nothing for us. And I just want everybody to be encouraged. Look, still buy your kids the toys, buy your kids all the other stuff you're going to get them, but get them something that's going to benefit them in this battle that we're in. So the website is powernomics.com. And Dr. Anderson, I'll let you get the last word. Do you have anything to say before we bounce out of here?
Yeah, and I thank you for that. As always, you're always encouraging and very supportive of what I've been trying to do, and always get very positive response from your audience. And I want to tell Black folk is that when you buy those books, before you open up and start reading them, I want you to do one thing that's very important. Put your hand up like this and put to your mouth. Kiss the back of your hand goodbye, because after that, that's pretend you're kissing your butt. Because once you read those books, you'll never be the same again. The lights will go on. You'll be a totally different person. It'll be much harder for whites to trick you, always waving cloth and giving you Bible and beads, saying, we got a doctrine of unequal exchange if you vote for us. And you say, I don't care whether it's a black person or a white person running for office. Show me how black folk are going to benefit. I don't care if it's the Democratic Party or Republican Party. You show me how black folk are going to benefit. Don't use these very broad and ambiguous terms anymore. Don't try to psych me to get my response in a system based on quid pro quo. You never give me a damn thing. And that's what our dilemma. And I appreciate you. You're always a conscious black man. And I want you to kick the hell out of all of them that keep showing up on TV. Black person, yeah, we need to do something for the immigrants. Why don't you go do something for the damn blacks that have been here for 500 years, not down in the Texas border? Why don't you do something for them in Chicago and Pittsburgh and St. Louis? All these blacks on the homeless rolls where black folk are carrying 68 times their fair share. For all these black 38% of all the black kids are on the poverty roll. When the unemployment rate for black folk in America nationally is 35%. 48 in Chicago, 48 in Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, 49% in Pittsburgh, 51% in New York. Why don't you do something for black folk? They always want to find some excuse to carry everybody's water. And consequently, if you see one of these guys on TV, whether it's CNN or NBC, as always, I got black folk carrying everybody else's water, get you a good brick and get 2 feet away from your TV and throw it at the damn TV. See, I'm sick and tired of black folk being double agents, always selling out their black people, and I can't find one but set up and say, hey, black folk are special people. They're entitled to be treated with respect and dignity. They're entitled to be appreciated and recognized and reparated. You got to redistribute some resources back in the hands of black folk, because right now whites own and control everything from New York to San Diego. Whites own and control every damn big building, every mode of transportation, airline, trucks, everything, communications. Blacks own nothing. Please tell them to stand up and start demanding. Don't protest and march and pray, oh, Lord, help us one day overcome. You start saying demand from anybody, politicians, elected officials, that what they're going to give you before they get your vote, or they come in your neighborhood and put up a business. You want some form of compensation, not symbolism, for it. And I thank you and I love you, and tell your people I'll see them again next week.
All right, my friend. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Claud Anderson. And I'll go ahead and let you go because I know you got to get back to your schedule. So thank you very much, sir. You have
Thank you.
All right, I'll see you soon.
Okay, buddy.
So everybody who's watching this conversation, don't just walk away and say, "Oh, that was great. That was really interesting." I want you to figure out a way you're going to change your life right now. I want you to figure out something that you're going to do individually that's going to shift what your family's trajectory is. Remember, the things that you talk about now in your household are going to affect your family for the next several generations. Many of us have families that have generational curses where there was something that somebody started in the 1920s and it's still happening in the family now. Well, I want you to find positive habits, positive trends, positive actions in your family that will just be family traditions. And so if you want to know if it sounded like I was really pushing the, powernomics.com and Dr. Claud Anderson's books, is because I am. The $99 that it costs to get the whole package, a lot of us spent that much money going to see the Black Panther. I kid you not. There are a lot of people that went to see the Black Panther. Think about this. You take your girl, your 2 kids, 3 kids, whatever, and you buy the $5 popcorn and everything else. By the time you're done, spend $40, $50 getting the tickets and the popcorn and all that. And then you go out to eat dinner after, you spend another $50. That's $100. And that meal is gone. It goes through your body and comes out the other end and it's over. Whereas I encourage you to also, in addition to all the fun that you can have, we all have fun, but go eat some knowledge, go, digest some knowledge, bite into these books, because this knowledge, once you bring it in, it is so fulfilling. When I read Black Labor, White Wealth, this book has a rip in it. This book literally has a rip in it because I have torn this sucker up. I've torn this motherfucker up because I'm literally going through it, taking notes and rereading sections and thinking it through. And it's so rich. It's something where I can read one paragraph and talk about that paragraph for like 30 minutes. It's that impactful. So to give that gift to your family, give them the gift of power, give them the gift of knowledge, give them the gift of your vision, and give them that gift for Christmas. Christmas is coming. You're going to spend money anyway. Go to powernomics.com. Do that Powernomics challenge that I mentioned. I want your help with this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to hashtag it right now, actually. I'm going to do something. I'm going to take a picture, put it on Instagram. My Instagram is The Real Boyce Watkins, and I'm going to put Powernomics challenge. So everybody use that hashtag, and I'm going to check it regularly. And what I'll do is I will grab your images, I'll grab your stuff, and I'll reshare it. I'll put it up on my IG. Whatever it is I can do to be helpful, like if you want to rep your business or something like that, I'll do that. Whatever I can do for you, I want to do it because I want to see all of us win. And I believe that we can win if we do it right. So last but not least, don't forget that number one, hit the like button, the share button, subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, take 1 second, please hit that thumbs up button. If you want to be connected via text, where I can text you when I go live, just know sometimes I might text you real early in the morning or real late at night, because sometimes I go live at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. We went live at 3 a.m. last night and had a Powernomics conversation at 3 a.m. because I was up. I'm still on Chinese time. My brain is. And we were literally talking Powernomics. Hundreds of us were talking Powernomics at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's how I think passionate we have to be about winning. I believe that passion, when you are passionate about picking up the knowledge, having the conversations, moving forward, outworking the next man, out hustling your competitors, being one step ahead, playing chess instead of checkers, and going out here kicking ass and taking names. Can't no white man fuck with you. Excuse my French. Nobody can mess with you if you own your stuff. And I really believe that. So that's why I act half crazy about this, because I really believe it's going to take a little bit of insanity mixed with black man magic, black woman magic, black girl magic, black boy magic for us to overcome this, what we're kind of dealing with. You have to be spiritually strong. You have to be optimistic. You have to be focused as hell. You have to be unified. You have to have a plan. You got to think it through. You have to obsess. You have to go hard. And that becomes your shield. That's my shield when it comes to how I deal with anybody. And that's why nobody, the people that might criticize or come and try to attack what we're doing, I literally can't. It literally bounces off. It's like a plastic arrow that bounces off a force field made out of steel, because I'm always churning mentally on how we can move forward as a community. So that's what we do. That's what it is. I hope you guys will be a part of it. And don't forget that tonight we're going to do that lecture on how to go from thinking like an employee to thinking like a boss or a business owner. And I want to say sorry to my friends on Instagram. The phone just fell over. But if you want to know more about that seminar, you want to be a part of it, it's going to be great. Every seminar we do is amazing. Just ask anybody who's been there. go to drboyceseminars.com. That's drboyceseminars.com. That's tonight, 11/1, November 1st, at 8 p.m. Eastern. So if you're watching the recording, you can go watch it a little bit later. You can get it out of our Black Entrepreneurship Program, but we're going to do that tonight. It's going to be great. So I'll see you guys soon. Have a great day, and it was fun. And take care. Be good. Having a good day. My name is Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World and the Black Business School. And every now and then, periodically, when I get real lucky, I get a chance to speak to arguably the greatest mind of our generation, definitely one of the greatest Black economic thinkers of all time, but one of the greatest thinkers, period, throughout the world, Dr. Claud Anderson, author of Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, and the Black History Reader. Dr. Anderson, how you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm like the old Black people used to say in the South, I'm fair to middling.
Too much.
Well, I'm glad you're doing well. You look great. And I saw you at the All Black National Convention last week, and you gave an extraordinary address, and it was an honor to have you there.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me, and I'd like to commend you. You had an excellent turnout, and those people were aggressively and hungry to get the information that you were distributing to them and sharing with them. So I was glad to be a part of your group. And amazingly, I mean, just to sign those books, you had to sign books for an hour and a half. People walking around said, Jesus Christ, that line was almost 2 blocks long.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, when you had, when you and I signing the books together, that was a real nice feeling for me because, I agree with you that the line was down and over and around and went all the way around the room. And it really made me excited to see all those Black folks that are really hungry. They're not hungry for nonsense. They're hungry for something that makes sense. They're not hungry. They're passing up the nonsense for the dollars and cents, for the common sense, for everything that you have, that you bring to the table. And I think that really speaks well to the future of the community. I'm real optimistic about that.
Well, I'm just proud to be a part of it, and I'm glad to be back on with you today. And what are we going to talk about today now? What would you like to do?
Well, I wanted to get you're a history expert. I know at the Harvest Institute, you've engaged in many legal battles on behalf of Blacks. You've dealt with the court systems on behalf of Blacks in terms of reparations and whatnot. You understand politics very, very well. In fact, from what I understand, you had that deep political history. You worked with the Carter administration at a very high level. So you understand the political game better than most people do. And so right now, you got a lot of talk about the Supreme Court, the situation with Kavanaugh and all of that. And you said something that was real interesting to me, where you were talking about how Black folks are not taught in school about this almost secret racist history of the Supreme Court, that there's a side to the Supreme Court that Black people were never informed on. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, it'll be appropriate since they took a vote today for putting Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. And I'm just simply amazed, Dr. Watkins. I'm just simply amazed. I cannot understand why our people in general and white folk in specific are so absolutely ignorant of history and its implications for the Supreme Court. And see, the Democrats are going to lose. They're going to lose every time. The new Democrats are going to lose every time, and Black folk are going to lose every time in any of these major issues. They're going to lose for a very simple reason. First of all, because they allowed themselves to be psyched out and focus on sexism and gender issues and the Me Too movement rather than having focused on racism. See, if they had focused on racism, they could have won this thing, but they didn't. They focused on the women's issue, the gender issues. And so that's why, and see, they don't understand that conservatism will override liberalism 1,000 times with nothing left over. They're never going to win anything because we live in a conservative nation. Conservatism means to hold on to what one got and make sure nobody else ever gets anything. Conservatism has no intent towards being open-minded and liberal. When you hear these fights pertaining that they're conservatives on the radio and TV shows and the movies, what they are saying is that we have no interest in anything other than our interest, our self-interest, and we have no interest in transparency and fairness. Why would you let somebody talk about he's going to become a judge, a conservative judge on the Supreme Court based on fairness? His mind is already closed. Conservatism means your mind is closed. And the Democrats should have known that. And see, but the old Democrats, the blacks also understand that the old Democrats were the people that enslaved black folk for 360 years in this country. And then the liberal, little bit of liberal republicanism came in about 1866 to 1876, only lasted during the Reconstruction period for 10 years. And even then the conservative racism came back again and wiped them out. And the Republican Party became conservative all the way up to about 1950. And then when the black folks started coming into leaving the Republican Party, becoming Democrats, the whole Democratic Party then switched over, and the old racist Democrats walked across the street and became the modern day Republicans. They've been flip-flopping back and forth. But either way, wherever whites go, the conservative movement means that we're going to win, and we're going to take and control everything in power and wealth and resources. And black folks hung up on the Democratic Party, thinking that somehow the Democratic Party is going to help them. Democratic Party cannot help black folk, and because they're not going to focus on black issues. That's why had they focused and made that Supreme Court appointment based on racism, they could have really won it. They could have beaten. They could have stopped Kavanaugh from becoming another Supreme Court justice.
Well, everybody who just came in, I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson. He's the author of Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, and the Black History Reader. And also he's the head of the Harvest Institute, one of the leading think tanks in America. So Dr. Anderson, I'm real curious about this. You as a historian, about a lot of the history of the Supreme Court, and you've even questioned, why blacks even seek justice in the court system. I've heard people say that. I've heard people say that that the whole system was designed from the beginning, just by the nature of who was on these high courts and things like that. It was designed from the beginning to keep black people in our place. If you look at the history of the court, there's never been a black woman on the Supreme Court ever. And there's been 2 black men and really only 1 black man, because the other black man was very anti-black. What do you think that we're, at what point, in what way do you think that we can even look to this court system to even give us any kind of justice?
Black folk are looking in the wrong direction, looking for the Supreme Court or any of the major court systems to bring about justice for black folk. Let's go back to the original intent. When the Constitution laid out specifically what blacks would be in this country forever, unless you attack and readdress those issues. When the United States authorized and approved the Constitution, it spelled out what black folks' role would be in the society. And as a matter of fact, in 1789, they defined it for black folks, saying black folks shall be a subordinated group of people, and they be a labor class valued as 3/5 of a human being, to bring forth comfort and enrichment for the white society. That's basically what it was saying. And they used the United States Constitution as the first affirmative action plan in the country to maldistribute almost 100% of all this nation's land, minerals, rights, businesses, income, privileges, and rights into the hands and controls of government into the hands of the dominant white society. And once they did that in 1789, the following year they set up what's called the immigration laws, and says now we can bring in anybody in this country, Dr. Watkins, who can pass for whites, and allow them to have all these benefits and privileges and rights and wealth holding and unearned income that we're going to deny black folks. That was in the 1790 immigration policy. And once they set that social construct into place, then they said, how do we make sure this thing stays intact? So then they set up the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court came into existence to maintain the whole purpose and intent and the goals and accomplishments that will occur as a direct result of slavery. That is the primary purpose of the United States Supreme Court then, at that point. And black folk never really understood this. And so, because it stayed pretty well hidden up until about 1803 with the Marbury-Madison decision, where the Supreme Court finally came out of the closet and rendered a decision then. But that was not based on race when they came out. They were talking about a state issue. But the United States Supreme Court has only 3 authorities. 1, they can get involved in any kind of lowercase rulings in the court system. 2, they can get involved in the dismissal of a federal employee. 3, they can get involved in ambassadorial appointments, and that is it, period. But they never were allowed to get involved in overruling Congress. Now that's the key point, that they were never authorized to overrule Congress. Now watch what happens now. So jump from 1803 up to 1857, Dr. Watson. In 1857, for the first time, the issue came up about black folk, because at that point in time, the whole abolitionist movement, they were talking about freeing blacks. And so in 1857, a guy named Dred Scott went to the courts to see about getting some freedom because he had moved from Missouri up to Ohio and moved back. He said, I should be free now. I left enslavement territory. But the Dred Scott Supreme Court came out and said this. Judge Taney ruled that black people or black men in general in American society had no rights that a white person was bound to respect. That was the first time in the history that the Supreme Court came out of the closet and laid out what their rulings for the future, that no black man had a right that white folks were bound to respect. And see, but from 1790 or 1789 up to the Dred Scott decision and the Civil War. Here's the point now, Boyce, is that point. See, they had appointed 57. You had 57. The first 57 Supreme Court justices were white slave owners. I'm gonna give it to you again so you understand this. The first 57 appointees to the United States Supreme Court were white slave owners. So by 1857, when the Dred Scott came in, those are all white slave owners, period. And now since the Dred Scott decision, after blacks were freed, they've appointed about another 67 people to the United States Supreme Court, bring up to about 127 appointees. And all of them have basically been whites, except 1 1/2. They had one black man on there in 1950, and they got a half a black on it now who's just pretending to be black. And so here's what you should be, here's the point, is that what the Supreme Court was saying by appointing all whites, even at the present time, you got nine on the Supreme Court, 5 white men and 3 white women. And what they're saying is that justice will be dispensed for black folk in this country, whether it started in 1790 with slavery up to the present time, based on justice being viewed through the eyes of white men and the white Supreme Court. You understand that point? That's why, and so consequently, the people, you got black robes and white skin underneath it. Whites see justice for black folk through the eyes of white skin underneath black robes. And that's why up to the present time, if black folk have said, hey, this issue going on in the Supreme Court, it is discriminatory in every respect and moral for you to appoint 126, 127 people to the United States Supreme Court and only appoint 1 black person in all those years. And so they had made it a racial issue and said not only is it a racial issue, but go back and says if you look at every issue and every ruling by the United States Supreme Court, it's always been negative blacks. They've never ruled in favor of black folk. Some people might say, well, Dr. Ezra, what about the 1954 Supreme Court? That was negative for black folk. They changed the desegregation law over to its social integration, which wiped black folk out and disintegrated blacks. But you follow the whole thing through the system. I could track it down, but we don't have that kind of time unless you want me to. We can walk through history.
I think we should walk through history because here's the thing. We don't get this in school. When they teach us history, they teach us that the Supreme Court is perfect and that that the checks and balances of the system is perfect and all this other stuff. And then when you go out and you are in an imperfect world where it just seems like black people always end up on the bottom of the pile, it's confusing to people. It's very confusing. So I personally think if you want to march through some of the key decisions that were made, some of the key things, like just the fact, for example, how many of y'all who are listening, how many of y'all knew that, 56, the first 57 members of the Supreme Court were slaveholders? How is a slaveholder going to make a fair decision on behalf of a slave? They're not going to be able to do it. So I would like for you to march through the history, if that's okay with you.
You're fine. Well, let's walk through it now. I stopped talking about. I brought you up to about 1860, up to the beginning of the Civil War. Now the Civil War came out, and at that point in time, blacks were still underneath the Supreme Court being dominated by slave owners and following the Dred Scott decision. But after the war was ended, and 4 years later, here's what happened. And 4 years later, you had a few liberal Republicans that came into office. They call them radical Republicans. And they said, well, that since we got some mixed kids, black kids, because as members of the United States Congress, we got some black mistresses and black kids, and we understand the Dred Scott decision of 1857. We must do something to give black folks some rights, because in the Constitution, it defined black folk in a negative sense. They met for a full week to say, how do we define black folk? So in the Constitution, when they talk about we the people, and all the people. They're talking strictly about white people. They're talking about black folk. When you look at in 1791, when they enacted the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights says that all human beings got God-given rights for life, liberty, and pursuit of property. And see, the black folk were defined as property. They changed it later on in the second right and took out the property and put in happiness in there. But here's what we'll do. They met for a whole week and came up with this conclusion. What we'll do in the Constitution is when we're going to talk about white people, we use very special, broad terms like we the people, all the people, the citizens, and now it might be Joe the plumber. When we talk about black folk who are going to be screwed over in the Constitution, we'll make sure they stay anonymous and ambiguous. Never point them out. Let never people know who we're going to make it. So who we're going to deal a raw deal to. In this society, we have two kinds of people: screw-ers and screwees. Whites going to be the screw-ers and blacks going to be the screwees. So what they said, and when you look at the Constitution, it said when they label blacks as being those who are indebted, those who are in bondage, that specific kind of species of property, those that unhappy lot, those are 3/5 of a human being, those who are equal to a field animal. They're talking about black folk. That was laid out in the Constitution so that everybody understood that, but without black leadership. They never understood the difference between how whites was related to and referred to in the Constitution versus blacks. But when the Civil War came, and after the Civil War, they said, let's put out some programs to try to redress what happened in the 1857 Dred Scott decision. And now here's where the Supreme Court jumped in again. So they put out, the first thing they put out was the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. And guess what? Those went into effect, and to strictly and solely for black folk, because see, whites got all their rights in the 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendment in the Constitution. Whites, in 300 or 400 years, whites didn't have any problem having their rights. They were spelled out in those amendments. Between the First Amendment and the 14th and the 12th Amendment, whites got all their rights. But when the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendment went out, Dr. Watkins, that was strictly and solely for black folk. Then secondly, at the same time, they put out let's readdress the Dred Scott decision, which says blacks have no rights. So they wrote 1865 and 1866 civil rights law. Now you got a 13th Amendment, a 14th Amendment, and a 15th Amendment, and civil rights laws. And that initiated what they called the Reconstruction period that would run from 1866 over to 1876. And they also set up what they call the Freedmen Bureau. Now, with all those things in place, black folks should have gotten something. But guess what happened? Between the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the Dred Scott, and the civil rights laws and the Freedmen Bureau, the United States Supreme Court jumped in 1876 and say, hey, all those things are unconstitutional. Because we as the Supreme Court, we are the guardian of racism in America. We're supposed to make sure we stay close to the United States Constitution as possible, and must stay close to what is called its origin, original intent. You might hear them always talking about the original intent of the Constitution. And see, black folk think that somehow in the Constitution, they were included in the original Constitution. They were not. The original Constitution says black folk are property. They're to be excluded, subordinated, and misused and exploited. And so when you hear these Supreme Court judges, we must stay close. We cannot be activist judges. We must adhere to the United States original intent of the United States Constitution. So after the Civil War, all the things they put in place for black folk, as I said, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the 1865 and 1866 civil rights laws, and the and 14 other, not 40, but 8 other civil rights laws between 1866 and 1876, the United States Supreme Court ruled them as being unconstitutional for the civil rights laws. And for the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, they says those must be broadened to include everybody. They cannot be specific for black folk. They must be available to any and everybody, so that anybody can use them. Therefore, if everybody can use it, that neutralizes blacks out and maintains the status quo, because we are the guardians of racism and make sure everything stays exactly where it was spelled out in the Constitution.
Interesting. Well, everybody, I want everybody to know, some of y'all watching from Instagram, some of y'all watching from Facebook, some of you watching from YouTube. I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson. Dr. Claud Anderson is the author of the books, Black Labor, White Wealth, Powernomics, and the Black History Reader. Now, if you want to know why I bring this man in on a regular basis, is because I keep his books near me almost like they are Bibles, because there's no books out here like this. There's no white university on earth you can go to, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, nowhere, and learn from a man like this who can teach you things like this on your behalf. And so ultimately what I encourage you to do is to take the time to make sure these books are in your household. He runs the Harvest Institute. Harvest Institute URL is harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. And they have they've been filing lawsuits on behalf of Black people, something that your politicians are not doing. No elected officials out here are doing this. No Hollywood actors and entertainers are doing this. They've been filing lawsuits for reparations, and a lot of people don't know about it because nobody wants to talk about it. And so anyway, make sure you do this. If you're on any of those other platforms, Instagram, anywhere else, and you want to come into where the conversation's originating, you can go to drboycetv.com. Make sure you subscribe at drboycetv.com. If you want the truth to be delivered to you on a regular basis, make sure you subscribe, drboycetv.com. All right, Dr. Anderson, I want to ask you this question. When you get a chance, I'm gonna pick up and continue all the way through up to the present time, if you don't mind. Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue.
Oh, okay. So after when the Supreme Court jumped in and started and classified all those Supreme Court laws, 8 of them, 8 civil rights laws between during the Reconstruction period, they classified them as unconstitutional to make sure they maintain the status quo on Black in the country. And in terms of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, they said those things must be applied to everybody. They cannot be restricted to Black folk. That's why all these immigrants coming to the country now will go back and lay claim to the 14th Amendment. They got rights. They're not entitled to those rights, but they were supposed to be for Black folk. And that's why even in 1872, you had some farmers, some meat packers down in New Orleans that says, hey, we want to use that 14th Amendment. They went to court and filed a lawsuit saying we want to get due process and equal protection in a union fight in New Orleans. And the Supreme Court was forced at that time to tell them, no, you can't do that. And it's called a slaughterhouse. It's called a slaughterhouse case in the Supreme Court that says that the 14th Amendment was written strictly and solely, Dr. Watkins, for Black people. But yet you got these immigrants coming to the country now demanding rights and race resources and privileges when they're not entitled to it. They weren't even in the country. It was for Black folk. So but they broadened it so that later on all these other immigrants are using it and women are using it. Women's issue was never part of this. And the women just jumped into it. And so in 1860s, now at this point, here's where things get tricky. And why you lead up to this Me Too movement now. And by 1848, as an example, when they started talking about freeing slaves, the women got concerned and says, well, we don't want you to free those slaves without us. And because right now we want to be equal to the white man. And so they filed a lawsuit in the early 1860s before the Blacks were freed, saying we don't want to be freed and not equal to the white man. They filed a lawsuit in the federal courts, and the courts told white women that basically you're already free. You're in a protected class. White women in a protected class. But they said, well, what we'll do though, we'll pass laws. They passed the laws called etiquette laws, which says that there's certain things that the Black man couldn't do because we need to tame and restrain Black men if we set them free. And so that's why in the 1870s that they put out these things saying that what a Black man could do and could not do. And then later on, you all call those the Black codes. Remember the Black codes in the South? That was to tame and restrain Black men. So what the Supreme Court did then is say, okay, we're going to strip away all the rights by ruling them unconstitutional for the civil rights lit, and broaden everything else so that everybody can use it, and even women can use it. And so what they did, they went back to, this is going to get very convoluted. So if I lose you, let me know. So because they use the same schemes they used in the original Constitution, which means make Black folk disappear, make them invisible, use broad, ambiguous terms. And so then women jumped up then and said, we want to be equal to Black men in all respects. Now that was so what they did then, go back. So in those laws, let me give an example. In the Freedmen Bureau. The Freedmen Bureau was put in place to give all kind of resources to Black folk. But as soon as they set it up, they said, we're going to broaden all these things. What about poor whites in the South? And so most of the whites in the South had lost their land in the South. They had lost their land. So what they did, then they ruled that the Freedmen Bureau could not be strictly for Black folk, that all the whites in the South as a result of the Civil War, who had lost all those plantations, all that land. They then ruled that they could recapture everything, all the land, the farmland they had, and recapture and own it again, even though they lost the war. And so, and once they lost the war, they said, well, we got all the land back. We can't use it because we don't have any labor. All these blacks and folks are free now. What are we going to do? So again, the Supreme Court got together with the North and the South. They got together. So I tell you what, let's enact these black codes and peonage laws so you can again re-enslave black folk. So in the 13th Amendment, they took that clause saying that you can own, that slavery was illegal unless you had been duly prosecuted or been declared, criminal in the courts. So they used they used the 13th Amendment to re-enslave black folk again. That's called Jim Crow segregation, and re-enslave them. And they took, and not only did they take away black folks' rights and freedoms through the Supreme Court, but they also and gave those rights to women. But they also, and that's how courts, for instance, in corporations now are being classified as people, as professional. That came out. They took that out of slavery and gave it to corporations. So corporations began to pretend that they were equal to black folk because of the court's ruling. That's why in a 20-year period after the Civil War, that out of about 100 cases that were filed, about 238 cases were filed in courts for using the 14th Amendment. Guess who used them? That only 18 were for blacks. The rest was corporations using the 14th Amendment. Nobody. So all the rights were stripped away from black folk because they made black folk disappear. This is getting a little complicated, but I'm going to keep pursuing it though. I'm going to show you how it keeps repeating itself. So in other words, when blacks came out, the Constitution set up how blacks would be treated, using very broad, ambiguous language. That stayed true up until the second Constitution was issued in 1860, which says let's set blacks free. But then the Supreme Court ruled that as being broad to include everybody, so they lost that. Now, that's why they lost all their rules in the 14th Amendment, 13th, and 15th Amendment. Now let's go up to the Civil Rights Movement. The same thing was used again in 1960, 100 years later. Because at that point in time, again, when black folk were talking about they want to have some rights and freedoms in this black civil rights movement and the desegregation decision, what they did, they broadened it so that it would include everybody. And so the whole concept of social integration applied to everybody. And that's why instead of black folk trying to correct what happened during slavery, they gave black folk social integration instead of desegregation. So blacks didn't get any resources or any benefits out of it. The 1965 Civil Rights Law, for instance, it says that all people have rights and then coming in the country. And they put in what's called Title IX. So that, again, white women who had raised Cain in the 1860s to be equal to the black man. In the 1965 laws, she jumped up again and called Title IX, saying a white woman is equal to the black man. And that consequently she can be classified as a minority. And so in all affirmative action programs, the white woman's thrown in there again, just like in 1866, and it came up again in the 1960s, where white women now get the majority of the benefits in society. Even though white women throughout slavery co-owned, co-controlled, co-influenced, and inherited 100% of everything the white man had. And today she can see the primary beneficiary. I looked at two civil rights laws in the rulings from the Supreme Court, and found that white women got about 78% of all the products and services and goods. Hispanics got something like about 27, 28. Black folk got 0.9%. So consequently, the Supreme Court has never benefited black folk. And so right now, any justice that's going to get black folk will ever get in the court systems will come through white eyes, would blame black robes. They would see justice and interpret justice for black folk. And yet black folk, if they had made that issue a race issue, they could have beaten it because you cannot legitimately call fairness when black folk have never been appointed to the Supreme Court more than one out of 460 years. Only one black person and 1.5 have ever been on the Supreme Court. And so justice is being purveyed, given out, dispensed to black folk through the eyes of whites on the Supreme Court, and even now white women, but no blacks. Had the Democratic Party made it a racial issue, they could have beaten the court system and gotten who they wanted on the Supreme Court.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Anderson. By the way, everybody, I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson. He's the author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, and the Black History Reader. He runs the Harvest Institute. I encourage everybody to make donations, to invest regularly in the Harvest Institute. If you want to do that, go to harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. This is, this is these are our institutions. This is our Harvard. This is our Yale. We got the Black Business School. That is your Harvard. That is your Yale. Those other institutions belong to other people. These were built for us, by us, and designed uniquely, specifically, without a doubt, to solve one important problem, and that is helping Black people to advance as a community. And so everybody else, they don't put Black people at the top of the agenda. You always get put to the bottom, and that's why you get mad. That's why you're frustrated. That's why it seems like progress isn't being made, or because you're being lied to. Well, when you're getting lied to, somebody's got to tell you the truth. And to tell the truth, they got to do research. Dr. Anderson is that person. He has done the research. He's telling you the truth. So everybody watching right now, before I forget, I want to have another question for you, Dr. Anderson. But everybody, I want to let you know, if whatever platform you're on, take 1 second right now and hit some sort of button, to a thumbs up, a like button, a share button, subscribe button, something like that. We're developing our own Black media, intelligent Black media, IBM. Maybe that's what we should call it, IBM, intelligent Black media for Black people that want to do better. So please share it. Please push it. Don't just sit on the sidelines. Don't just watch. Don't just sit there. Please take a second and hit a button to subscribe to something. Okay. So anyway, let me get back to this. So Dr. Anderson, I want to ask you about this. Look, with this whole Me Too thing, I have concluded, especially as I'm reading cases, Reverend Jesse Jackson's people hit me up, reached out to me the other day about a case of a young Black man who apparently he had sex with 2 white women. And the 2 white women claimed the next day that he raped them, even though they solicited the sex, they initiated everything. They said, well, because we were drunk, we couldn't officially consent to the sex. And so they took the young man off the football team, tried to kick him out of school. He's now on trial for his life. He might go to prison for many years. And there's videotaped evidence. His name is Quintez Cephas. He's but the thing is that there's video showing that after the incident, the young ladies were not drunk. They looked perfectly sober or close to it. They sent him text messages after the fact saying, I can't wait to see you again, all kinds of stuff. But these white females are trying to still ruin this Black man's life, and people still believe them. And so my conclusion, and this links back to what you were saying about, our rights being trampled while other people's rights being elevated, white females in particular. I feel that some white females are really predators for Black men, that we got to the point where Black men feel hunted. We've always been hunted, lynched, everything else. But I feel like a Black man, I feel like I'm hunted by these predators that want to, pin false allegations on people. They know they got the court system working in their favor. They know that the Black man does not get justice, so they take advantage of that. Can you kind of speak to that in terms of linking it back into the history of the courts and why we can't seem to get fairness and justice in this system where everybody's telling us that the system's going to do its job?
Well, that's why I alluded to that a few minutes ago, because the Black people never understood that white people in a protected class. You got 2 groups in America in a protected class. That's the American Indians now that went into a protected class in the late 1890s, and white women. And now in the Obama administration, we're trying to put gays and gender groups into a protected class. Everybody's in all those groups in a protected class of Blacks. But the code of conduct and now the code of etiquette that were put out in the 1870s said it is a death sentence for a Black person to do anything that's offensive to a white woman or to be in contact with her or touch her. That's why you had the Tulsa riots, because a Black man tripped and fell and brushed against a white woman on an elevator in Tulsa, and which is really Greenwood, Oklahoma. And then 600 Blacks were murdered because of that and shot and lynched. And I told you a few minutes ago, white women are in a protected class. There's a code of etiquette that says do not touch and be near her. That's why, as I said, from 1880 up to 1900, over 2,800 Black men were lynched for being in the close proximity to a white woman, or going to a white man's house when he wasn't home, or writing love letters to her, or reckless eyeballing like Emmett Till and all of them. All of anything that is a cardinal sin, because you see, white men put white women on a pedestal. Then he put himself down below there on an even level, right below her. But then he put all other women on that same level with him. So you got 3 levels. You got the white women at the top. You got the white man in the center with all women around him, so he can have access to any woman. Then beneath that, on the 3rd floor down in the basement, is a Black man, and that's the nature of your social construct. is that the white woman at the top in the peak, the white man in the center having access to any woman, all women around him, and the black man in the basement with no women. And so out of that came this concept, what you all like to call castration. You ever heard that by the castration complex? What that means is that the white man put black men in the basement. And when he found out that somehow the black man was still making contact with white women at the top level, bypassing him, going over him, going up 3 floors and touching him, then he began to put out this mythology about the size of the black man's penis and all that stuff. That means that he must have a long, big organ that stretched from the basement all the way up to her. And that's where that's how psychological castration complex came from. Is consequently, every time they lynched a black man, they also castrated him, Dr. Watkins. That was the point of castrating him. Because they did not want him to be in touch with the white woman. That's why I said they lynched 2,800. That's why Emmett Till got beaten and murdered. And that's why Bill Cosby now is going to go to jail. Because again, you violate a basic concept of going into a protected class, messing with white women. And unfortunately, or ironically, most of the blacks in our so-called overclass, whether they're athletes and entertainers, they're still trying to reach the white woman. And that's the greatest fear that the white man has. And is that you would touch her. And that's why we had about 300 something race riots in the United States. All the race riots in the history of this nation up until 1960 was generated and conducted by whites, not black folk. Black folk were never rioting. It's up until 1960s, almost 100% of all the race riots and revolts in this country came about as a direct instigation of white men. And in most of those, there was something doing with white women. So that's why we talk about Rosewood. They talked about, again, killing black men because of white women. Or you go to Wilmington, North Carolina, or you can talk about Tulsa or Greenwood. It's always over white women. So Cosby then violated, and all these athletes right now and entertained, they're getting by because they're marrying white women and dating white women. They're in a protected class, even though right now, and white women's want, and this Supreme Court thing, this Me Too thing is a challenge to white men saying, we want to be with you. Even though white women right now have about 47% of all the jobs. White women right now made up about almost 51% of the feminist population. They got about 67% of all the graduates coming out of college, university graduates and degrees. They got about 87% of the nation's wealth in terms of stock, and they got the biggest mortgage companies in the United States. And consequently, they call it the glass ceiling. They want to be totally equal to the black man. That's what the Me Too movement is about. But if they were genuine concerned about black women, why didn't they go out over 360 years of slavery and another 100 years of Jim Crow semi-slavery and call it an us movement? An us movement by saying we're going to go out in the fields and be with those black women and let us be mistreated, where every black woman was being raped during slavery. And the white man had a marbitz, which says any white man should initiate his entry into sex by getting into bed or conquering sexually a black woman by the time he was 14 years of age. And almost every black woman and every black girl was raped or robbed or indulged in sex by a white man by the time she got 14 or 15.
Well, everybody, I want you guys to know I'm talking to Dr. Claud Anderson from the Harvest Institute. He's the author of Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, and the Black History Reader. Dr. Anderson was actually at the most recent All-Black National Convention. And also, Dr. Anderson, I wanted you to know that, first of all, everybody loved you at the convention. They thought your speech was extraordinary. And the one thing that they did come back at us, they hammered us because they said you should have gave them more time. You should have let them talk longer. So I wanted to ask them next year if you could come to the convention and do a Powernomics certification. Would you be interested in coming back to the convention and doing a Powernomics certification next year?
Well, I'll be glad to do that for you. And I thoroughly enjoyed your group, and I thought you had a good turnout. And the day we were discussing the Supreme Court, I guess again I have to apologize because what I'm saying is very academic, and I know I probably created more confusion than enlightenment today. But we can walk through the points, make sure they fully understand the key points, and any of them you want to raise between now and the rest of your program, just run them back past me. But I'll participate in anything you come up with. But I want blacks to understand how this system works. Supreme Court is the guardian of racism in America and the whole federal system. And more importantly, is that you got what's called a Federalist Society. and that goes and picks the most red-wing racist whites in the country to put into the federal judicial system, and that's where Trump is selecting these people from. He's already appointed 24 federal judges to the federal courts, and they're going to